I'll just take it for granted that you're going to work through that, so I'll assume all that. Last time around, we talked about 3 essential skills for doing this thing that we do, Bible. One was stories, right? Learning how stories work, both intuitively and analytically, just being able to work here. And the second, tightly connected to the first, was a sensitivity to the detail, paying attention to every little detail, what is there, and particularly what is not there that you might expect. A lot of times you've got to, if we have time today, we'll do a little bit of David's story, and you'll notice something that you expect to be there but is missing. And we'll see how that works. And the third is connections, knowing how to make the proper connections between stories. And that just takes practice, it just takes communal conversations so we don't make the wrong connections and make the right ones. So 3 basic skills, and then 3 basic attitudes from Isaiah 66, right? So humility, and with that humility, a contrite spirit that's quick to discern when I'm off, and then submitted to the word, a heart that trembles at God's word, right? We talked about that. Are there any pending questions from the last time around? Anything that, thank you so much, it's perfect. Anything that crossed your mind that would be worth discussing from the last time? Great, we can keep going. So I wonder how you came to faith in Jesus. I wonder how you came to trust Him. I wonder what you were looking for. And I wonder what you found. Anybody want to take a shot at that? I know it's early in the morning. I can pass my cup around. We can do a little communion thing, you know. Yeah. So, how did you come to faith? What were you looking for? What did you find?
For me, it was an answer to death. So, as a kid, I was always scared of death, and that was the reason.
That was the reason. And what did you find?
I hadn't died
yet. So you're waiting to see. Let us know how it works out. It's a great answer.
So what I found, I have a up and down swing on being afraid of death and looking forward to a banquet. Right?
Yeah.
I still don't want to die.
Yeah. And yet, have you ever come close to dying? Have you ever experienced anything near?
Can I take a couch?
Yeah.
A couple of times.
Couple times.
Actually, when I was born.
Oh.
And then, several times in my youth, and then my life has been threatened twice in my missionary work.
Sure, that's vivid. Yeah. Anyone else? What were you looking for, and what did you find?
I came to faith very young. My parents are both followers of Christ, similar to your story.
Yeah.
I don't have a Damascus Road type thing.
Sure.
But somewhere along becoming an adult, this becomes mine. It becomes not something that they gave me, and they did, but I came from a pretty strict, dogmatic, kind of exclusive background. My parents weren't as much, long story. And I had to work through that. Went through a really rough period of agnosticism while I was married. But I found a lot of beauty, a lot of truth, and I think we sometimes don't talk about the beauty as much, maybe, but a lot of forgiveness, a lot of inspiration.
Beautiful.
This has all been the last 7-8 years or so, probably longer than that. But
you ever heard of a program called Alpha? Anyone?
Yeah.
Alpha?
I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, it's a really cool program. It's out of a church in London called Holy Trinity, Brompton. Nikki Gumbel, if you ever heard the name. It's like a 12 to 16 week series. You know, you just pop the video in, you watch it, and you gather people who don't know much about faith or are mildly interested, or those who know, and then you just kind of watch it and then you talk about it. And he's got there's something really wonderful about how he communicates the simplicity of the gospel just beautifully. I've been doing it, for 5-6 years now, and leading people to faith, it's like the easiest thing in the world. There's something very beautiful about it. And I was involved with Alpha in a past life in different ways. But Alpha started off as this little thing in this little Anglican church. But then now there's about 10 million people worldwide who've gone through it. Some bizarre stories, like a bunch of Greek Orthodox monks started watching it. And halfway through it, they all started speaking in tongues, which is like, what is going on? And they all profess to have come to faith through Alpha after having been monks for, and then they've been spreading it. And the Russian Orthodox Church uses it, the Catholic Church uses it, whether you're Pentecostal or fundamentalist, everyone sort of, there's something very cool about how there's just a lot of different ways, kinds of groups that all come together when we talk about the gospel. Coming to faith seems like a kind of a focus thing. And so then the guys who were leading Alpha started a project 10 years ago to build a beta. So what happens next? Now they all come to faith, now what happens next, right? And so then they try to partner with all these different groups to try to build something. I was part of that for a while. It never went anywhere, because we found out very quickly that while we could all agree on how people come to faith, more or less, what happens next is not very clear. There are 50,000 different opinions on what happens next. So that's the question. That's the core question that we have to look at, is having begun to trust Jesus, how then do we live? That's the question. And there are lots of options. For instance, you could say, I trust Jesus and then he gets me out of hell into heaven. That's it. No more, no less. I don't have to worry about anything else. Or you could say, I trust Jesus and then he fills my life with good things. Wealth, health, happiness, the perfect marriage. Or you could say, I trust Jesus and now I run my business on Christian principles. I try to live a moral life. That's it. Or I trust Jesus and then I do all I can to learn every biblical rule and principle so I don't sin, at least I minimize sin. Or I trust Jesus and then I do all I can to return America to its roots as a Christian nation. Right? There's a Christian nation, there's no place for other religions here. These are all actual viewpoints. I'm not making this stuff up. There are large communities of Christians for whom each of these becomes a defining directive. You ever heard of a preacher named Billy Sunday?
Yeah.
Yeah? You should Google him. You should look him up. He's awesome. There are little clips of him preaching, and he's pretty fun. Anyway, so Billy Sunday's approach is very simple. You hit the sawdust trail. They have these big revival camps, tents, and they have sawdust, and people would walk up to the front and say, hit the sawdust trail, you receive Christ as your Savior. Then he said, you walk out of the tent, get hit by a Mack truck, and you go to heaven. So then you don't have to worry about anything, because you were saved, and before you could sin anymore, you're gone. No time to backslide, no temptations to bother with, no doubts to wrestle with, no spouse to honor, nothing. That's it. Instant eternity. So that's the real question I think we're trying to understand, is this book is not just for intellectual knowledge. I don't know, it's not for that. It's because at a core level, you and I, the reason you're here on this table is something has gotten a hold of you in your heart level, your soul, your mind, and that something is attracting you, compelling you into a different way of life. Right? So that's what we're trying to figure out, and that's why we're doing this. And so I think Mike talked to you about posture. Is that right? Posture is a wonderful word for what we're trying to figure out here. What's our posture? Let's say that these people discover a hitherto unknown play by Shakespeare. Let's say that, it's the discovery of the century, who knows what. I don't know if you're into Shakespeare, but if you are, it's the discovery of the century. And so, but they discover this play, but here's the thing. Only the first two acts are found and the third's missing. right? A play has these three acts, and there's a tension that's built up and resolved and all that. But we have the first two acts, we don't have the third act. How do we do this? And so one way of putting the play on might be to find the best. This is a metaphor that N.T. Wright uses, one of my heroes. You could find the best Shakespearean actors, those who know Shakespeare really well, and have them completely immerse themselves in the first two acts till they can breathe it, feel it, think it, and then they improvise the third act. Can you imagine that? It's really cool. You don't know how each version of the play is going to look like, because you get the first two, you script it, and then you improvise. And I think that's the Christian life. I think that for me, the most simplest way of looking at it is you immerse yourself fully in this book, till you know it, its textures, its stories, its nuances, you feel it, and then you improvise. That's your life from day to day, because the things you face today, there isn't a verse that's going to tell you what to do. But as you immerse yourself in the story and the stories of the text, then something comes alive and you start thinking. So the blind man, we saw that last week. It's a very fertile story. We scratched the surface. Lots more in it that we didn't touch. But if you understand it, then when you find yourself in certain situations, you'll be the blind man, or you'll see yourself being the parents, or you'll discover that you suddenly became the Pharisee. So that's what we're going to do. So what is the big story, right? How do we frame it? And I want to give you a couple of different pictures. I think, do you all have this handout? Oh, you don't need it right here. So here's the first one, and this is N.T. Wright, who's a wonderful theologian. Are you familiar with him, N.T. Wright? You ought to. Great guy. Read anything by him. It's all good. He gives a 5-part meta-narrative, five acts that frame the story so far. The first is creation. So God creates a man and a woman in God's own image to fill the earth with the presence of God. So creation. The second act is the fall. The man and the woman choose to not trust God. And so sin enters into this good creation. Third act, so creation, fall. The third act is Israel. God chooses a man, Abraham, and his descendants to reverse what has happened, reverse the curse fundamentally. But the third act, we also discover that this people of God, they fall apart. They fall into the same stuff that the same story of Adam and Eve keeps replicating. The fourth act is Jesus. So now God comes in, he sends his own son, he becomes one of us to become that second Adam, to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. So that's Jesus, the man who is going to be faithful to God. And then the fifth act is the church. And you see the early church framed within this setting, doing what they are called to do. And then his point is, now that we have these 5 acts, so today we get to improvise. Today we get to figure out what the church is. And it's a complex question because, you could say, no, I'm going to go back to the New Testament and we're going to be a New Testament church. We're going to do it exactly the way they did it. And that's a worthwhile endeavor. You should. And yet, so much of what we face today, they had no clue about. So now we have to stay true to these 5 acts and then improvise in the present. Does that sound risky to you? It is. It really is risky because in improvising, we might go off the track, right? We might make mistakes. We might screw up, but that's part of the journey. We discern Spirit's wisdom, the history in the text, the community of other believers. We discern that path, and then we walk it.
Can I ask a question right there?
Absolutely. Yeah, anytime.
Or you need to try to get some more time?
No, it's great.
Can you talk a little bit about that question and maybe interact around that? Does that sound risky? Does it really? Do you need to know what he means by that?
No.
Because the point of view that Pavi is espousing is a point of view, and there may be folks here who grew up with a totally, like John alluded to his background. Improvising is not the way most American preachers describe the Christian life. They say, this is a handbook, you do what it says, it's going to tell you every step.
And I know what it says, and this is what it says.
And if you don't stay within those bounds, you're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
So that's what that's where the risk comes in maybe, but I just wanted to say, this is a point of view.
Yeah.
It's the right point of view. Maybe.
Thank you.
So apparently the point of view is shared by at least one other person.
Well, I don't know, he hasn't convinced me in 3 years, but.
So I'd like to dig into that just a little bit and understand if you find that suggestion risky. Improvise. You don't find it risky because
I've been improvising all my life.
I think it's risky for the teachers or the pastors. I think that's why, because I talked to a friend of mine. I feel like that's why a lot of pastors do what they do, because they're afraid to give their congregation that freedom
That's a really good.
because of
That's
the
very insightful.
because of the implications that it is for the pastor. Like, what, you allowed your congregation to do what? It's like, no, I didn't say that they were supposed to do that. Like, it kind of gives, if you give all the rules, then you're kind of in the clear.
Yeah.
Especially if you say, here's the book and it's clear.
Right.
It's your fault if you don't read it.
And every single part of it is clear, which is what I grew up with. Every single piece is crystal clear. If you would just read it, everyone would agree with us.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. That wasn't stated, but it was implicit,
Right.
which isn't true, by the way.
And since you all are readers and teachers, it is risky.
It's risky.
Did you finish your thought? You said you grew up improvising, or you've been improvising.
Well, again, so I became a Christian in my late teens, and then kind of went to Hong Kong to be a missionary. So
How long were you there?
18 years.
Wow.
Went to Philippines, completely different. Went to Shanghai, completely different. Come here, completely different. So I've never been able to get comfortable with any theology or methodology or whatever you want to call it.
I think that's one of the, when we get to church history, we learn a little bit of that, where we look at multiple cultures and how they actually follow Jesus, and some of them look like crazy pagan stuff to us, to what we're used to here. It looks wildly different, and yet it's deeply true. So that's the tension we've had to face.
So does anybody feel like they're improvising? You do?
Yeah, I mean, like, in this, like, like Pavi said earlier, like, I don't have these situations in my life, right? Like, I'm not a blind man, clearly. But like, my life isn't scripted in this book. There are, guidelines, and there are attitudes, and there are postures, and there are feelings, and there are examples for how to live a faithful life and how to be a servant. But my life isn't in there. There isn't a Jessica chapter that's written that says this is going to happen and you're going to need to do this. This is going to happen and you're going to need to do this. And so, the Word of God is there to teach us, but it's not there to, it's there to keep us on a path, but it's not there to physically hold our hand and walk us through everything. So we have to improvise. But that's what the Holy Spirit is for.
The improvising scares me a little bit just because I find times in my life where I look back on it and I question myself, like, was I right? And I feel like I sometimes blame myself if maybe someone didn't come to Christ. And so that's the kind of scary part, but
I think too, the role can almost be comforting because it's like a set thing that like you said, like, okay, if we know exactly how we're supposed to do it, then kind of. But the improvising, we've been doing this gospel DNA study with some girls, and Krista does, and just talking about the difference in the rules and the heart change, and the improvising is what leads to the heart change. Caught up and stuck on things. So.
If you don't have that in mind, what often happens is you tend to want to go find a story somewhere in the text that you map onto yours very tightly, and then you imagine that whatever that character is exactly what he's supposed to do. And you can hear many so-called expository messages that work like that. They try to map things on, and then this is what he's supposed to do, and it doesn't really work. It's kind of wooden and doesn't help a whole lot. It makes you feel It's a risk. It's a risk. What do you do with the transgender person who wants to get baptized? This is something I'm dealing with. There's a brilliant book by a guy called John Roughgarden on evolution and creation. He's an Anglican priest, and you read through the whole book and you discover the last chapter he used to be Joan Roughgarden. Which comes in utter shock, like, wait, what? Now I'm like, I'm not sure what to do right now. And so, and then she is explaining how she sees this, how he sees this, and how her identity is framed this way. What do you do with that? Don't actually know anything in the text that talks about transgender issues. And that's just extreme, but there are 1,000 little things. So I'll just, improvising is how it is. It's, my son plays jazz. That's what he does. And jazz is very fun because there are the standards, right? You've got these classic tunes. And then you've got the band, and let's say it's, you've got the rhythm section, and you've got a soloist. They are in conversation with each other around the standard. That's what's going on. Every performance is different. And they're in conversation. And that's a lot of what we do. We have the standard, so to speak, but then here's a performance, and we're improvising, and we're conversing with each other. What did you think? And so our faith is fundamentally communal. We need each other. On our own, we'll think we're doing all right, but we probably miss half the time, and we won't even know it. So.
One last question.
Yep.
What is the risk?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah.
I love it when he says that.
It's a great question. I'm going to write that down.
What is the risk?
You're not doing it right. Get it wrong. You're not in line.
Not right, getting it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
God might ask you to do something you're not comfortable doing.
Mm.
That's very different than that.
But
Yeah.
it's still part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's very different. Like
Hey, you gotta do this.
the I don't want to be wrong posture.
Yeah.
Who falls into that camp, right? It's like, I just want to make sure I can get through today and get an A+. So
I'll take
Not
a C
wanting to
minus.
be wrong is part of the incorrect point of view. That's
Yeah,
based
well,
on
that-
the
yeah.
assumption that there's.
yeah, I'm not suggesting that. It's like that's the subtle risk. Or then you have the other risk of if I'm improvising, if I go outside normal bounds, they might ask me to do something I don't want to do.
I don't know how to do it.
Or I don't know how to do would be
Or it's
similar to
not-
wrong. So
it's not-
those are good answers.
It's not like NCS. It's not done in an hour. It's all wrapped up.
Yeah.
It's this ongoing thing.
Yeah.
I won't want to do it, or I won't know how to do it. What would be the other? There may be a couple more questions. What would be your risk if you had to put it in a question like that? I won't know what to do. I don't want to do it.
The risk couldn't it also be that becomes the way, the new way that has to be followed? My improvisation becomes my congregation's way of having to do things.
So that's
They
like a
then-
meta risk.
Yeah, I could see that.
That's powerful.
Yeah, that's a wider thinking
I mean, that's
risk.
how
Yeah.
churches have gotten where they are, is
Yep.
because somebody improvised. Billy Sunday was just trying to find a place where it wasn't raining.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you had to have a tent or you couldn't come to Jesus. That's really.
That's
Yes.
well put.
Yeah. That's to tie this together with another conversation that we've been having as a church. The whole multi-site movement used to be 5, 7, 8, just this very short time ago, used to be an improvisation, and I loved it. But they mechanized it, and now there's a way to do it, and now people are turning that crank and knocking it out, and it's like meh.
I'm with you.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's-
but that's what happens. That's what happens.
Yeah.
Things get solidified. So that's an interesting 2 steps away risk. Well, are there any other categories for you personally? I'm afraid if it feels like a risk to you, I won't know how to do it, or I won't want to do it. Are there any other ones? Who are the risk takers? Like, see, none of that doesn't bother. I'm like, I'm in. Just because I would rather do it. So some of us are like, so what's the problem with risk?
Yeah. We're foolish for the sake of being foolish.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Cheap thrills.
That's right. Yeah.
But that's easy for us to say. What if you're the leader of a congregation and they say, "What's the goal?" I'm
Or improv.
Improvising? I don't know.
Yeah.
That doesn't go over very well.
Can I throw two more risks into that?
Yeah, please.
Here are two big ones. One is you might miss God's perfect will. Oh my gosh, that's a scary weapon to wield, right? Oh, if you don't get this right, your
You're going to be
soulmate.
outside the will of God.
That's
if you do
right.
that.
Yeah, you did this wrong, and therefore your soulmate got sent away to Indonesia. You'll never meet her or him again. That's that. That's there, right? That's one. Second one, you don't get this right, you will sin. It becomes a matter of sin. And then that's a very heavy burden to carry. I read an article the other day by this guy asking if anxiety is a sin. And at the end he said yes. I was like, wow. Because Jesus says, don't be anxious. That's his point. He said, don't be anxious. You're being anxious, therefore you're in sin. I'm like, that's crazy, man. But that's the wooden way of reading the text, completely missing the point.
And it's the way that lacks compassion.
Totally.
Piece
Yes.
that is missing from all of those things is
Compassion.
it's easy to intellectualize. I mean, this is the answer. My answer to the question about what brought you to Jesus was, how do you get from this intellectual situation to being human?
I'm more afraid of what Joel was talking about, leading other people astray.
Mm-hmm. That's a leadership feeling.
Well, but it's also a
It is.
parent feeling.
Yeah, parent.
It's
Maybe.
also
Yes.
a daughter
It's very
feeling. It's
good.
also a, if I do
Yeah.
this wrong,
That probably stems from mistrust of God, that you have to do it right because you're not trusting God that He's ultimately going to do it.
Or you have a picture of him where he's actually waiting for you not to screw up and get it right.
He's the Joker in Batman.
Yep.
He's going to trick you.
Yep.
Pavi, you use the analogy of jazz with your son where they improvise based on a standard, right? So improvisation is not just making it completely up as you go along.
That's right.
It's improvisation within
That's right.
a bounds, within
Yeah.
a context. And as long as
Yeah.
you get that standard,
Yeah.
then improvisation should become more free.
That's right. So that's the first part of the two-part gig is you immerse yourself in the text until it is you. Your intuitions are formed by the stories here. And your imagination is converted, which is the most important part of who you are is your imagination. When your imagination is converted by the beauty of this text, and I like what he said about beauty because it is beauty. It's not just cold truth, there's beauty and goodness pouring out of this book that we've got to be formed by. And then, which then leads me to the next question, which is a big one. If you could pick one word or one metaphor or one story to sum up the whole Bible as you see it, what would it be? If you get this wrong, it's all over. Yeah. Yeah.
we're close.
What would you pick? One word,
No, you're not getting
one story, one metaphor, one framework for the entire big story.
Freedom.
I love that. Freedom. Okay. Freedom.
I thought of when the harlot is caught and the Pharisees are ready to stone
John
her.
4,
She
yeah.
just draws the line in the sand and says, "He's without sin, cast the first
Yeah,
stone."
I love that. Yep.
I'd probably say the lost sheep and the shepherd.
Lost sheep and
You
shepherd.
came seeking
Yeah.
purposely
Yeah.
redemption.
Any Old Testament ones?
Love.
Love.
God's love story for us.
Yeah. I think you're onto it. I mean, I would pick the word gospel. Good news, and the story is fundamentally God's great love for us, amazing love for us, and our great unfaithfulness to Him, constant and unending unfaithfulness, repeated in the face of His faithfulness, in the face of His goodness. And then His love that keeps persisting to the point of laying His life down, right? So that's gospel. God doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. If that is true, if you hold that to be true, then that should frame everything. And that is what Todd's talking about, that misses compassion. If this is a big story, then no story without compassion can possibly be true. no story where you see God as this fearful tyrant, the Joker, Batman. He isn't that, because he's the God who lays his life down that we might live. He's not trying to hide something and make sure you don't miss the mark, all that, right? So that's a construct. That's the big story. Our faith, and this is the next in sequence, our faith is fundamentally center defined and not boundary defined. You know what that means, right? So center defined is just a way of thinking where you've got this core, something that you hold on to, and that's what defines you. And as you move away from the core, it's very fuzzy and it gets a little less distinct, and that's totally okay. That's one way of living life. Another way is to be boundary defined, where you say, I've got these things, and I'm going to draw a little line, put a little fence, and if you're in, you're in, if you're out, you're out. Our faith is center defined. Our faith is center defined. Except that 99% of us who practice our faith act like it's boundary defined. Okay? It really is. There are certain things that are at the core of our faith that we do have to defend, we do have to explain, we do have to hold to. For instance, the Trinity. It's a difficult doctrine. My friends, my Muslim Imam friends, one time we were in conversation, and this guy said, brother, even a child can tell you 1 + 1 + 1 is not 1. I'm like, yeah, I know. So tell us. I'm like, I don't know how to explain this thing. I can go with these little metaphors, but at the end, I can't explain it. I don't understand it. I really don't know how that means. And he said, but then you did that to yourself, It's your problem. I'm like, I know it's our problem, but it is our problem. And it is our joyful belief. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we believe that. We hold it to be fundamentally true that Jesus was both fully man and fully God. Again, whatever that means, and we look at that in church history a little bit later on. We hold it to be fundamentally true that he died for us and that he rose again. This is crucial. We say it is true that there is one creator God who made everything, right? These things are basic. Then there are a host of other things that we might not agree on. And then, of course, let me ask you this question. What is an example of a belief that you think needs to be at the core? I gave you a few, but what others come to mind?
Salvation, like that it's only through Jesus.
Okay, yeah, that seems pretty important. Yeah. I know.
Don't give too much away. Leave yourself some room.
I know. What else?
Being born again.
Okay. Seems pretty important.
Can you repeat the question?
What is core to us? What is at the heart of our belief that we must hold on to? That we all must work towards agreeing and holding on to,
That we are dead in our transgressions.
Yeah. Yeah, Ephesians says it pretty directly, yeah.
Jesus died.
Resurrection. Yeah.
Okay.
Peter said.
That he was,
Resurrection.
That he was God.
That he was God, yeah.
The Bible is God's revelation to us.
Yeah.
It is his revealing of himself to us.
What about some that don't belong at the core, that are important but they're not fundamental?
How old the earth is?
We'll come to that.
My least favorite argument in the world.
Yeah, we're going to do some of that today.
You're quite radical. I'm starting to worry about you.
I've been hanging around you too much. That's the problem.
Okay, here are some things that the church has been deeply divided on. Mode of baptism, sprinkled or immersed, right? Should you use musical instruments in worship? This is a big one. People got killed over this stuff.
And still, this is current as well. This is we're not talking about 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Current. You can
Yeah.
go anywhere. You find it.
Should you use buttons and hooks in your garments? This is a huge issue. With the Anabaptists about 400 years ago. No kidding. And to this day, if you go down to Lancaster, you'll see people who are still discussing this issue. Tattoos. Yeah.
Says the tattooed fellow.
I actually have none. Of all people, he's on the right side. I have none.
Still clean.
CR.
So what?
tell me.
Are they?
So in the first century, you have pilgrims who would come to Jerusalem because it was a holy city, and a mark that they came to the holy city was to tattoo a cross on their foreheads. And so it was a very common thing. And then right away in the first century, a debate began. Leviticus says that you shall not do this as the pagans do, and you just put a cross on your forehead. What are you? So they're still debating it. So periodically the church puts together a few core beliefs and says this we hold to be core. And we call those creeds. You've heard of creeds, right? So that's what a creed is. Really, periodically in different places and times, the church in a local setting or more of a global setting will put a few things together and say this is what we've always believed, this is what we've always taught, this is what we must always hold to. So let me read to you the Apostles' Creed. You may know this. I'm going to read it to you. I want you to listen to what is at the core. Is it what he expected? And then also listen for what would you have put there that's not there. Fair enough? I'll just read it out to you. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended to the dead. On the third day he rose again, he ascended into heaven, he is seated at the right hand of the Father, and he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. This is the oldest creed we have that's in a complete form. What do you hear? Was anything that you heard that struck you as, wait, what?
Judgment.
Judgment, that it's there, okay? Yeah.
That the Catholic Church called out specifically.
Okay. I should explain that. In that context, Catholic simply means the church, the big church, not
So
the
they'll
Roman
print it
Catholic.
with a small c.
Yeah, small c. What else?
Can you read the part from the Catholic Church?
I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins,
Okay.
the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting.
Because when that was compiled, the Catholic Church was still 600 years in the future.
Yeah.
So
Yep. What do you not see that you might have expected to see?
Is God in there?
It says, I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. So you could infer it.
Okay.
It's not explicit.
Okay.
What's Pontius Pilate doing there?
He was pretty important.
He's pretty important. Well, why do you think it's there?
how come he gets called out?
Yeah.
by name?
Yeah. Why do you think that's so?
Why wasn't it Judas?
It's worth thinking about. It's actually there's a good angle for it. They're attaching it to history. A real person in the records, in the Roman, you can go and look him up, he's there. Yeah, this is historical, this is not stuff that we made up. The age of the earth, sadly, isn't there. I'm sorry, John. You can't wait for it to be there.
And not because there were questions about that.
Yeah. Yeah,
There were always questions about that.
right.
Not central.
I want to list to you a few issues that good Christians today differ on. Okay, these are issues that might shock you that we differ on. I'm going to list a few, and there are 20 more that I'm not listing. Here's the first one: inspiration of the Bible.
Yes.
We differ on that. It's not like those who are Jesus people, we don't all agree on that. Some of us believe that there are no errors of any kind in the text. And some of us believe that, Leviticus says 24,000, Paul says 23,000, let's split the difference. And so some of us believe that the Bible is trustworthy and sufficient for all things from faith and practice. But inerrant, what does that mean? There are some differences, right? The Gospel of John puts the cleansing of the temple at the very start. The other three Gospels stick them at the end. So what, did he do it twice? Once at the start, once at the end? Did he heal 2 blind men or 1 blind man? Did he go to Jerusalem just once, as Luke clearly makes it out to be? Or did he buzz in and out of Jerusalem like John makes it to be? There are real issues that we have to wrestle with. So, okay, that's a big one. Here's another one: creation. Young Earth, 6-day creation, about 8 to 12,000 years ago, roughly. Or is it an old Earth that accords more with what current day science tells us, 4-odd billion years ago? And then, if it's an old Earth, is it old Earth creation or is it old Earth evolution? Or, as another perspective says, he's not talking about any of that. He's not even talking about the age of the earth in Genesis 1. What about providence? Is God completely sovereign over all things? Or does he give us free will? So he's really not in control. In fact, there's a version of this that goes into saying God doesn't actually know bits of the future. He doesn't know things that are unknowable by definition. Open theism, for instance.
Because he chooses not.
Because he chooses not to. Or eternal security. Once saved, always saved, or the one who endures to the end will be saved. Right? What about those who never heard the gospel? And so there are multiple viewpoints here. One is there is no other name under heaven, so if they haven't heard the gospel, that's that. Or another viewpoint is, but he has not left himself without witness. So even those who never heard the way we heard have some form of witness. Or there will be a chance after death. Which is the classic Catholic idea of purgatory, which the Catholic Church is actually setting aside progressively. But then there are Protestants who are picking it up right now and talking about, so that's there. What about baptism? Is it essential for salvation, or is it just an outward sign of an inward grace?
So he's talking about the act of being baptized.
Yeah. Should adults be baptized once they come to believe, or is children's baptism okay? What about the gifts of the Spirit? Are they for today, or have some of them ended? What about women in ministry? I don't know how you all handle that, but
Todd.
how was it? Anyway, I won't tell that story.
You might be.
What about hell? Is it a place of unending torment for the wicked? Or is it like, are they just destroyed? Annihilationism. Hell is hard for me. It really is hard for me. And I wrestle with that constantly.
That's the one part of the story to try to get compassion into.
I know.
Seems to be absent.
It seems to be pretty rough, man. Yeah.
Heaven is hard for me.
Pardon me?
Heaven is hard for me to understand actually what it is. You get glimpses, but
Yeah.
are the streets really full? Or is that just, all these people are dying and you're going, are they there? Are they with Jesus now? Are they conscious? They don't have a body?
What exactly is going on? And these are just a few. There are so many more, sometimes people think that this is the way you do church. And we have a little non-liturgical liturgy. This is kind of the way we do it. And then you can't really change that because that's how it's supposed to be done.
Well,
The way we do church has nothing to do with the way the first church actually did church. Not at all. Very little in common. Not that it should. In church history, we look at that a little bit too. So, go ahead.
I want to add one other one just because I think it's critical for how Vista is. And it's so different for us from backgrounds people may come from, and that's, it's called ecclesiology, but how authority flows through the church. There's no agreement about that amongst Christian organizations, but it's really important to think about. We don't think about it at Vista at all, but we really need to.
It's true. There are different forms of that, yeah.
Do any of you have? I'm not asking you for I'm not asking you for which one particularly, but do any of those issues for you fall into that's a really important issue and you got to decide on that? Do any of those pop for you where you're like, that's not negotiable?
Do you mean that's an important issue to me and I have
Yes,
to
you.
prioritize
Yes,
it,
you.
or other people?
Yeah, you would say, you got to push that into the core stuff. That's got to be part of your.
The gifts of the Holy Spirit are important to me.
Yeah. whether or not they're still alive or not?
Oh, no, they're alive.
That they're alive, not or not, yeah, it's not an issue. Right, good answer.
So I leave now.
Okay, so can I ask you, what happens then if you find yourself in community with someone who says, oh no, I don't think they exist anymore? What do you do?
So I said for myself.
Yeah.
So I'm married to a wonderful wife, and so we've lived through a lot of miracle type of things, right?
Yeah.
And we're very different, and yet we don't worry about it. I'm saying it's core to me. I'm not saying it's core to what everybody else should have.
So it's okay for you to live in that tension,
Hopefully.
I've done it
right?
for 24 years.
Yeah. And some people would have a hard time with living in that tension.
Yeah.
I've found that more so in today's church, and maybe even within the last, I want to say 10 years, but it's certainly within the last 20 years, I find people less concerned about this is the right box, this is the right boundary, as much as they are, what is your boundary?
What is your boundary?
And then I just won't come in there to even start.
Yeah.
People are looking for the boundary that matches theirs, and then they'll go there. There used to be a
That's
time
true.
where people were very strongly saying, we've got the right boundaries, and we've got to get everybody in here.
Right.
I think it's more like, in my experience, I feel like new believers or people who are still questioning have all those questions. And then at some point, for me at least, it was like, no, does it matter? You know what I mean? Like, does it matter to me really that much? Because it feels like it's outside of that
Yeah.
core.
Right.
But when I was questioning and struggling, like, or figuring out salvation, like, those were really important questions to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. My fellow pastor and I at the church, Emma, a very polished, educated, middle-aged woman came to visit with us, spent 2 hours explaining to us a whole host of things she was concerned about, including the fact that she believes strongly that Obama is the Antichrist. And
She must read my Facebook feed a lot.
is that input? I don't want to know.
I don't subscribe to that, but it's everywhere.
Okay. So what would you do? What would you do?
Oh boy.
She loves Jesus. She's wonderful. So go ahead.
About it.
Huh?
I would take it and consider it.
Take and consider it.
Out of respect.
Yeah.
I give him Mike's phone number.
That's a good one. I didn't think of that.
As I was studying in the PCA, can't remember which document it is, but
Tell us what PCA is.
Presbyterian Church in America to get ordained, but one of the documents, innuendo that Pope was the Antichrist.
We've had people walk from Vista from political things that they didn't think that we were being
Political enough, really.
right,
Right.
especially with this type of issue.
Yes. That's one thing that attracted my wife and us to this stuff, is they don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very big
Well,
deal.
and that's why some people walked.
Right.
and
Right.
didn't.
Yeah.
So then there lies the question then, I guess, is are we improvising? So as a whole, I mean, really, if you think about it, like Vista is improvising,
Yes.
right? I mean, is that how we're wrapping it all together here? And
Well, I think the safe answer for me is
yeah,
everybody's improvising.
that's what I mean.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just
That's
some
what I'm
people
saying.
think they're not
Right.
improvising.
Right. I mean, in essence, we are all improvising.
Constantly.
Right.
Right. But there's a
There's a foundation.
There are standards.
well, and how big is that box? And a lot of
Yeah.
there's a lot of folks that if an issue comes up, then they're going to find their answer to it, write it down, incorporate it into their box, tell everybody what it is, and then put that list on the door so when people come in, they can see
Yeah.
whether they are in or whether they're out. And the odd thing is the most authentic and arguable reason for that is unity.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like if you do that and you say, like, this is everything we believe, you're either gonna go to our church or you're gonna go to this church.
Right.
Are you ever gonna find one
Right.
that fits it? And then when your viewpoint changes, you have to switch a church.
Right.
And then that becomes your religion of like
So
finding
Right.
there's enough on my list that I'm.
Right. So you can the bigger and more solidly you make your box, you can ostensibly find unity. But what do you lose?
Community.
Because you
Because
lose.
you focus. You're focused on the list and not on the people.
Well, I would say yes. You lose diversity,
Oh,
Right.
which doesn't make for much community.
yes.
You know, who wants to have 50 people around just like
But
me?
that's
You know, I
exactly-
think I like myself
and in
until I'm
fact-
hanging out with 50.
In fact, you never find unity anyway, because the human beast is to always divide.
Yep.
Well, can I offer? Okay,
But
unity
it's
doesn't mean
backwards, though.
unity does not mean the absence of tension.
Right.
You've got to define unity around difference and tension. Otherwise, even within yourself, you're not going to be united. You're going to have
Right.
issues there. So.
That's one of what we've identified as one of the most significant, if you were at the leadership community earlier this week, we talked about trying to better understand who we are at Vista so that, which is difficult because we don't have a solid box. That's part of the reason it's difficult to define who we are, because we're so indefinable on a lot of what people typically find definable.
Yeah.
And so we're having to define ourselves in these very different ways. And one of them is tension.
Mm-hmm.
We actually embrace tension.
That's where that's how you meet people where they are.
Yeah, it's how you grow. And we have lots of reasons, but I'm not trying to defend it. I'm just saying we have discovered that
Yeah.
it is living in tension
Yeah.
that is part of who we are. If you don't know that coming in,
Yeah.
that's worse than not having a particular doctrine. If you're looking for come to church and be able to go, this is not the place for you, because it's just
Right.
trying to, that
It's all-
word
love
that,
that.
that
If
word
you go to
tension
another
has come up.
church, though, that's just wrapped in a different package.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? You just
But
call it
based
something
on-
different. That's
Based
all
on
it
the
is.
personality of the pastor, and there are pastors who solve problems,
Right.
and there is you who embraces problems.
Yeah. Or creates
Causes
them.
Or creates.
This is not a lie. It's not a lie. I feel like if it's not broken, break it, because you need to have something that you're struggling with, or like it just doesn't go well.
The interesting thing about the
Yeah, let's have a moment of silence to reflect on what we just said. It's awesome. I love it.
discussion
Yeah.
about our values, but we need to take 2 steps back and realize that part of boundaries are the things that we refuse to put in the boundaries. And what Cindy mentioned about, well, we don't advocate a certain set of political. We actually do have a very well-developed political point of view at Vista, and it is that we're not like we're going to be political here. But that's important to realize that negative definition is going on all the time. That you're also
That's good.
defining things positively. So everything you put in means you left something out,
Mhm.
and people need both of those, and all of us do that all the time.
There's a verse in Ecclesiastes that I've come back to time and again for decades, and I always butcher it because I've read it in different forms, but it says, really, the wise man holds on to the one without letting go of the other.
Yeah.
And you can just feel this tension, it's just this, Jim Zapay actually taught me the phrase, the truth is found in the tension. Whenever that verse goes on to say, essentially everything in moderation, and that man will not take extreme space anywhere. So many places in Scripture where we take an extreme, and it's hard to defend it. It's hard to defend. It's defendable, potentially, but it's usually breaking down something else
Yeah.
when we do that.
The history of the church, the Reformation was an amazing thing that happened, but it split the church. Right? There were those who said, we hold this to be true and you don't, and we're just going to go and do this. We're going to. In fact, the argument was, we are the true church. I don't know who you people are. That's the core of it. And they called each other spawn of Satan comfortably. I mean, the language those guys used to talk about each other is awesome. You go read Martin Luther, and he's like, whoa, the things he said are pretty cool. But then immediately after that, the Protestant church kept protesting internally and splintering and dividing and killing each other over differences. In 1980, there were 17,000 Protestant denominations. 17,000 groups of people who'd said, we are the true church and you're not. Okay, that's 1980. In the year 2000, there were 42,000. Okay, I think in our time, no one's even counting anymore. You just start your own, you decide that's whatever, and so this is it. So there's a loss there. There's a loss. There's a sense of, there's a profound loss there. Anyway, the question that comes up is then, how do you handle this range of views, right? You could, as we've discussed here, put up a list of the key positions, and this is our position on each of these things. You have white papers or position papers that define that. People can walk them through your doors, grab a stack of white papers, go off and read them. Either they come back or they don't. So that's one way of doing it. And then we argue with each other, right? We want to persuade each other that my position is the right. And I've spent a lot of my life doing that, sadly. Just a waste of my life, really. That came out of my own insecurities than anything else. I just wanted to be right. Therefore, only way I could be right is to try to tear other people's positions down. And you outgrow it after a while. At least you ought to, really. It's good when anyone here in your 20s? Have at it. That's the time to do all this stuff, but then let it go and then keep moving on.
Hey, Pavi,
Yeah.
share how you talk to somebody. You shared this the first year in terms of listening and stuff like that, of different positions.
Yeah.
And then you can share that.
Yeah, we're going to dive into that right away. So the alternative is to avoid all these debates. Right? One is to get into them and kind of win. And the other one is like, don't talk about the hot issues. Let's just talk about Jesus and compassion, and then let's not touch anything else either. And that doesn't make any sense either. Then it's just an impossible, fluffy, undefined little world, has no strength, no teeth, no. So I think the solution is to actually have these discussions, but to do it in love, truth in love, with character, knowing our own, whatever. And here's a very simple principle I'd like to advocate. This is just common sense, but you have to, any divisive issue, you have to understand all the primary ways that people look at that issue. Not every single one, but at least the dominant ones, the ones that clearly people seem to hold. There are multiple points of view on creation, for instance. You really can't argue this unless you have an understanding of each of these positions. Not just an understanding, but an understanding that you can reflect back in such a way that a person who believes that says, yeah, you got it. Does it make sense? So if you can really internalize these multiple viewpoints and say, yeah, young Earth, this is the best argument for young Earth. Old Earth, yeah, here's the best argument for old Earth. Then the young Earth person says, yeah, you got it. That's exactly right. You're not caricaturing my perspective. You're not poking at me. You're with authentic love expressing my viewpoint. And the old Earth, you express that. And all the way down. If you can do that, then two things happen. One, internally, you gain wisdom. You start thinking, oh, that was actually good over here. And that's actually good over there. It's not as simple as I thought it was. And you could be the point of connection for people to defer. Suddenly you have conversation going on.
There's a pretty big issue right there, though. Like you defined learning something new from that person as wisdom. Why would you not have the conversation? Why would you espouse the view of, even if we're having the conversation, I'm not really listening to you. You're saying yours, I'm not going to hear it. When you're done, I'll tell you mine and try to convince you of mine. Pavi's saying you actually listen to what's being said. Why would you not listen, even listen?
Huh?
What would be the motivation for not listening at all?
because the issue is more important than the person.
That's a good
And so
one.
you want to hit them with the issue instead of listening to the person.
That's one great
And that
reason.
was my background, not
Yeah.
personally, but the church we came from
Yeah.
was very much that way.
Yeah. Why else would you not listen?
Ignorance.
Because you're dumb? It would be stupid not to? Or
Yeah, ignorance, yeah.
Because you don't want to be deceived.
Oh, that's good.
that's the big one. That's where I'm shooting at. A lot of times you'll be deceived. Don't even listen to that person. That's what people would say to us at the bridge is like,
Sure.
you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're going to go down there. You're going to meet those Muslims. You're going to start believing what they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't listen to that.
Mhm.
Don't listen to that. That's why you tell your kids
Yeah.
not to listen to certain things.
Yeah.
Or just a
You have kids.
foundation for that you could learn that you've been deceived all along and you have an incorrect viewpoint.
That's right. You might not know when your doctrine is being shifted.
And this is where the question of authority comes in a lot.
Yeah.
Is because the people who tell you this are asserting that authority over your thinking.
Yeah. Well, some people would just call it wisdom to not associate with those people with the wrong viewpoints or the wrong. That would be wisdom.
Totally. It's foolishness. Yeah. One of my favorite preachers, I mean, I actually don't agree with a lot of what he says, but I love the way he preaches, said that in the last 30 years I haven't changed my mind on anything significant. I was like, wow, that's kind of sad.
Right. So you're still 12?
I respect him. He loves Jesus, no doubt about it. But there's the box, and the box doesn't change. That's kind of how it is.
A lot of it too, they don't understand why they believe what they believe on whatever issue it is. They've never studied this particular whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so they're very insecure because they've never questioned themselves.
Yeah.
So someone else espouses, I can't listen to
I
that.
can't
I
listen
don't
to
really
that.
know internally why I hold to this in the first
Right.
place.
There are two other common ones. One is insecurity. Yeah, deep down, you don't even admit it to yourself, but you're afraid that they might be right. And then you have to have made a shift. I don't even know about this, so you don't want to do that. Another one is what's happening politically right now. This you can't give the other guy any ground.
Yes.
You cannot give even a little bit of you got something. It's completely demonized.
Yep.
You're either an angel of light or you're,
Antichrist.
Antichrist. Really. And so then you cannot listen to anybody else because what if something they say makes sense? You can't do that.
It's important to understand which one of those you have it's more like you, because that's going to be your block from actually engaging real dialogue with somebody different than you. Whether you're afraid that you can't have an intelligent conversation, or whether you're afraid you're going to be, changed in a way you don't want to, or whatever the reason is, you got to be aware of your own weakness in that space, so that you can truly have community with somebody that's different than you. If you don't, you won't have community with someone different than you, and you won't grow. You won't learn. You won't see things differently.
Some of the most intelligent men that I know will always tell me the older they get, the less they know. Right?
Sounds like Socrates.
And that's the reality, right? I mean, that's the truth.
That's true.
Part of that is just he gets so tired.
Well, I mean, the more you ask questions,
Yes.
the more you realize that you don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Yep.
The more questions you ask, the more you realize you don't know the answer.
Yeah.
And Mike's point about the bridge is important because we're not just talking about seeking unity in diversity inside the church, but we're also talking about apologetics.
Yeah.
Yep.
About apologetics.
Yeah.
About your neighbor who says religion is the source of all trouble.
Yeah.
Because that's a fast-growing point of view that you will run into.
My daughter Hannah is 11. She's a super friendly, warm, just fun girl. She's the emotional center of our family, and she loves to make strong, bombastic statements. All Indians are vegetarians. Like, honey, well, not really. No, yes, they are. Like, have you looked it up? No, I just know it. You know? So we have an ongoing conversation. I'm like, you can be confident, but you should do your homework. She says, that takes a lot of time. You know? Like, yeah, it does, but she's 11 and it's cute. If she's 21, it gets irritating.
Exactly.
If it's 41, you walk away.
Yes.
Well, you kind of answered the question then right there, is that, to me, I think there's a propensity that people, if it comes from a certain leader, person, it has to be true.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Right? Is that true?
Right.
I mean, if he said it, then that's the truth, and then we're not going to deviate from that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I find that to be less and less true.
Yeah, it's going away.
There used to be a day when you would, I
Yeah.
find authority pretty much pitched aside in
Yeah.
most spaces. You know, it's just like,
Yeah.
that's good for you to say, no matter who you are. Yeah. I
So
even get
the
it.
irony is that there are people in authority who are telling you that there's no such thing as authority, but they want you to believe them.
Yeah, well, I would, that's probably true. I find it to be those that aren't in authority just as much. Even kids. You know, there's a lack of, I've heard kids say things even to me where I think, I would have got clocked.
Yes.
Right.
But that's normal, like for you to just say, you know.
Yeah.
But even innocence, really. You know, I had a little girl come up to me and said, Pastor Mike used a bad word on Sunday. You know, that's a big leap for
Yeah.
the little. I think she's probably
Yeah.
8 years old. Used a bad word. Oh, honey, what did I say? You said stupid. I was like, I said that's.
Bad
I'm
word in our
sorry.
house.
I'm sorry, honey. What should I have said? You should have said silly.
Silly.
You should have said silly. I'm
Silly.
like, I'm looking at mom and she's like. But there's a openness to you know, reject or question what's there. There's that fear. There's not a fear as much. I think it's in one sense healthy, but.
So if you're going to do this, if you're going to actually take the posture of understanding the dominant perspectives on these issues, a couple things happen. It takes time. You got to put the homework. You got to do the homework. And while you're doing your work, you've got to suspend judgment. That's really hard to be able to say, I'm not going to decide on this till I've done the work, you know, and talk to people. But if you do it, if you're able to do it, then what you come out with is a real understanding of all the different perspectives out there, and you can actually explain them in a way that people would accept. But what you gain, I think, is you might come out of it saying, here are the 4 dominant viewpoints out there, and here's what they are. And you know what? After conclusion, this is the one that I find compelling. And if you do, then you can say it with humility and confidence. Right? This is where I'm at. And I'm open to more evidence. If you have more data, I'll change my mind. And then the amazing thing is, if you can actually do that, then you'll find that people actually will change their minds listening to you. Because they realize you actually heard this thing, you explained it to me. Oh, so now it's just not pointless debate, but it's constructive conversation. You know, and that happens. I've seen it many, many times. That if I can tell you, here's what you believe, right, and you go, yeah, that's exactly right, and you're looking for all little traps that I might be setting up. You know, that's what we usually do, and it's not there. Then your own heart lowers the defenses, and you can listen. Do you have? Yeah, it's here. It is. This is Genesis 1. I'm not sure if I'm going to actually do it or not. I don't know if you'll survive it. You know.
I think I have to go now.
You have to go now. Yeah. So this is Genesis 1, and what I've done here is to put down the text itself, and then I put down 4 of the most common models. There's a couple others that I wish we could have put in there. But what I've done here is to list what I think is the best case for each position. So here's the young earth position. Here are the reasons that people believe it. Okay, here's an old earth perspective. You're all familiar with the text, so let's just go through a couple of these so you get a flavor of it. Let's look at the young earth position. That's on page 2. So here's someone that believes in a young earth perspective, explaining why. Well, clearly the Bible says that God created the universe and all that is in it in 6 days, right? The ordinary meaning of yom is a 24-hour period. Why are you complicating the matter? Why he's taken in stuff from somewhere else. And the word yom for day, it almost always refers to a 24-hour period. And pretty much in the Bible, if any period described by that word is 24 hours long, unless we have a direct indication of the text that it's something else. And then if you go through the text, every time this word is used with a specific number before it, it always refers to a 24-hour cycle. That's true. That's there. Then you read the stuff about the author says evening and morning when he describes each day. That normal usage would indicate it's a normal day like we know it. Now, why would you complicate that? It's unusual to speak of a long period like a few million years as having an evening and a morning. Right? Then fourth, Genesis 1 talks about days and years. When he puts the sun and the moon, he talks about days and years, and then they refer to literal days and years. So why would you use this part to be literal, and in the same part, same section, the same word to be non-literal? And then finally, you have the Sabbath, right? He commands the seventh day to be a day of rest, and it's a literal seventh day in the rest of the text. So why would you suddenly make these to be non-literal? So the young earth argument fundamentally is it's there, it's not complicated, you're just making it weird. Why don't you just read it? It's just there, it's simple. Fair enough? That's the usual argument, and it's a powerful argument. It's a powerful argument.
You should hear echoes of Fee and Stewart in what Pavi was saying.
Sure.
Those are Fee and Stewart principles that he's applied.
So, and it seems compelling until you start hearing the other perspectives. So if you go to the old earth, well, the old earth is, they say the usage of yom, day, is not quite as clear as you're making it out to be. Here are some examples. It can refer to, and then there are some examples that if you go and look at it, you go, yeah, you're right. The usage is wider than you'd expect. There's a breadth to it. The second, if you interpret the days as 24-hour periods, we have difficulties in the story itself. Like the sun doesn't even show up till the fourth day, so what days are you talking about? And then you can say, the younger guy could say, God can do anything he wants, but you can't actually say that. That's not fair.
Yes.
It's not helpful in the argument.
This is where I've lived for a long time.
Yeah, so then...
My dad is all about this.
And then if you stay with the direct understanding of the text, it's difficult to see how some of the events could have happened. Like in the sixth day, Adam named all the animals. Okay, so on face value, let's say he named one animal every second. 86,000 animals, and you're done. And there are far more species that are available to us right now. Did he actually do that? I mean, he named all the animals? He wasn't saying Spot and Rex, but he was actually calling them. And what exactly was going on when it says Adam named all the animals? On the plain reading of the text, there were very few animals, or something else was going on. Right? And then several passages of scripture seem to indicate that God's days are not measured like our days. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by. And then the Hebrews 4 seems to indicate we're still in the seventh day of creation. What's that even mean? Something there. And then finally, a number of passages appear to teach that the earth is very old, ancient. And ancient is a lot more than a couple thousand years, the way that the passages, and I listed a few here. So now the core argument of old earth, hear this. The core argument of young earth was it's a plain reading of the text, right? The core argument of old earth is, well, it's not as plain as you say it is. There's more to it than meets the eye. There are some internal questions in the text. You notice nothing has come from science yet. It's still in the text, Then there's the gap theory that I'm going to skip. You can read that just for sake of time. Yeah, well, there you go. We'll gap it. Yeah. And of course, the old earth then has to also deal with is it by creation or did things evolve? And if things evolved, then what happens to original sin? What about death? What about violence? There are some very thorny questions all around. And so the fourth picture is sort of a literary framework. So here the basic idea is that the text is not prose, it's poetry, which is absolutely true. You read Genesis 1 Hebrew, it jumps out at you. It's beautiful poetic language. And you see the swing to prose when you hit Genesis 2, and suddenly the whole language changes. And now you're in a story, and the feel is completely different. There's a flavor of Genesis 1. So then the literary framework says something like this. If you read the text, you see this pattern. On the first day, he creates this something. On the second day, he creates something else. He's creating spaces, the heavens and the earth, then the sky above and the land beneath, and the waters from the land. He creates spaces. Then on the fourth day, he puts something into that first space. The sun and the moon go into that first space. And then something else on the fifth day goes in the space he created on the second day. And then on the sixth day, he puts stuff into the space he created on the third day. And then he says it's all good. And you go, oh, that's interesting. There's something going on in the literary structure of the text. And should we pay attention to that? Is there some point to it? Because poetry works like that, right? It creates metaphor. And metaphor is so then what might that mean? And then you start looking at other texts from that time. If you go back 3,000 years ago, and you find other texts from the ancient Near East that talk about how they build a temple, one of these cool little temples, ziggurats that go up to the sky, and then there'd be an idol, and they'd bring the idol into the temple and install it. And the story they told about how this was done sounds a lot like this story, actually. So you start thinking, wow, if I'm willing to even read these extra biblical documents and give them any credence, which many of us won't, but if I do, then the structure of this first story looks like what God is actually saying is that he makes his earth, and then he installs us, Adam and Eve, as his idol in this temple. And an idol simply means a representation of God in this place. So then the story starts fitting into another structure. That's complex. That's not obvious. Most of us are not going to read the stuff and get there. Mm-hmm. And so then there's the resistance because, shouldn't I read the Bible and it should be plain to me? Why should I have to know all this stuff to understand X, Y, Z? That argument is highly flawed simply because you don't know Hebrew. Right? Mm-hmm. I assume none of you do. Maybe you do. But if you don't, then someone had to translate it for you. Someone had to have special knowledge of Hebrew and translate that into English so you can actually read it. So everything we read comes to us mediated through people who have knowledge that we don't possess. Mm-hmm. So then it's totally plausible for there to be a literary structure to the text that's not obvious and needs someone to explain that to us. And so there are viewpoints like that. I would encourage you to work your way through this. I'm just skim through it so I want to go into other stuff. But this is an example of what I'm talking about. This is my understanding of four dominant perspectives. And I think most people who hold a certain perspective will probably say, yeah, that's fair. I would have done a better job explaining it, but it's very concise. But if I have that in my head, then I'm able to then interact with very divisive stuff. This is very divisive right now. My gosh, the lines are drawn in crazy ways. If you don't say, I'm a 6-day little young earth, oh my goodness. You should watch me dance around this at my church. I'm very good at dancing around these things. And so, but it becomes, if you don't say the right thing right now, I'm done.
Yes.
I don't even want to talk to you anymore. To the woman who came to me saying Obama is the Antichrist at the end, after 2 hours, what I said to her was, wow, it's really, I hear your heart, and it's clear that we agree on a lot of things, and we may not agree on some things. I didn't define what those things were, And so then we ended up talking about her heart and the hurt. All this comes about hurt for the most part. There's a hurt. And if you can get to that place, then the conversation is very different, Okay, so I'll stop right there. Any questions on this approach? Highly recommend it. Don't argue until you've done your homework,
Pavi?
Yeah?
You didn't answer my question yet.
I did not. Can you answer it for me?
Say that I have a view.
Yeah.
Completely different from yours.
Yeah.
How do you deal with me?
Yeah, I would first listen to you. Listen. I wouldn't express anything. I want to understand completely what's going on, why you hold to it, and then get past the purely analytical to the heart.
Yes.
Really understand where all this is coming from.
But then what's the second thing that you do? Do you not repeat that?
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
that you've heard what I've said?
Yeah.
And then it allows you to give your viewpoint.
Right. And in fact, in that moment, you might not even give your viewpoint.
Yes.
I mean, another conversation another day. You've built relationship, you've listened, and so now you did that to me. Now I feel safe with you. I feel like you actually do care about me. And then and some other day you might actually listen and go, this is not that important. I don't even have to tell you what I think unless you ask me. I just listen to you. That's good enough. We have unity. We can keep moving on. So.
Yeah, I think there's a big piece of this techniques of discussion that says, let's not over-define our differences. We have a tendency to overestimate what a difference is, and there's a lot of things we think that we disagree on that if we really had the right playing field, we wouldn't regard it as a disagreement at all. We're in.
Totally.
We just have to be
Totally. Very, very true.
defining in.
Very true.
And knowing the reasons why somebody takes a position.
Yeah.
It's very easy for me to take a position on something based on what I've experienced. So it's not even about that position so much, it's about, in my house we talk a lot about Christianity and homosexuality because we have that in our family. And understanding where those people are coming from that made that position that they come from.
So this is what Pavi said about hurt. But another similar comment is, remember that theoretical positions are developed for reasons that are honest reasons. And if there's a school of theology or if there's a denominational point of view that you don't accept, you still have to understand that they developed it from Scripture to solve a problem or to answer a question that they had. In our church, the big thing is, sort of dispensational Arminian versus your sort of Reformed covenantal point of view about salvation, and both have reasons for existing that were valid. Of course, one is right and one's wrong.
You had to say that, didn't you?
Are you sure?
This is Todd's solution to being more open-minded.
You were going so well.
I didn't say which.
That's his solution. Is that now at this stage, it's clear that I have an
Choose
opinion.
wisely.
Choose wisely.
Choose wisely. So,
they're intellectually honest, self-contained points of view that you have to understand. That we're just
That's well put.
restating
That's well put.
what Pavi is saying.
what's the objective?
Oh, great question.
What's the objective of this approach? What's your objective? You're open-minded because
Build a relationship.
trying to build a relationship?
My younger brother and I are very close. Him and I came out of this movement together. He lived in Alabama, I lived in Ohio. A lot of hour-long phone calls, a lot of books, a lot of arguments, a lot of discussions. Very intelligent, much smarter than I'll ever be. 8 months ago, he said, I'm studying justification. And it's not what I thought it was. And he spent months and months and months fasting and praying. Called me and said, we need to talk. He said, I think I'm going to become a Catholic. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, and here's my stuff. Now, he's not a fly-by-night guy. He's like, here's why. And I'm like, I have no answer for that. And he's found Jesus in a very real and tangible way. And we argued and we fought and fussed or whatever, but at the end of the day, for Easter Sunday, him and his wife, after literally weeks of fasting and prayer, this is where God wants us to. I'm not gonna shoot him in the face for that.
Totally.
God bless you. So I went took a picture of St. Paul's in Westerville where he was confirmed, and on my phone, and I edited it, and I printed a big 8x10, and we wrote him a card for the day he was received
cool.
into the church. I gave it to him, and he cried. My brother's not an emotional guy. He's Mr. Spock. He's stand away. He said, "Thank you so much for being supportive." And I said, "Man, look, that's what it's about."
Yeah. That's powerful.
My brother said this to me. He said, I wish he was here, he'd love this. He said, Jesus Christ is not a theological proposition. He's not a test.
Yeah.
And if you get the different answers on the test than I do, then you're wrong and I'm
Yeah.
right, and get out.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is the person that we follow.
Right.
We may get different answers on the test, but at the end of the day, God bless you, brother, I love you with all my heart, and we follow Christ together.
Yeah.
I think that's the crux, and that comes from him, not me.
Yeah, it's good.
I think the fear is there's people who, and I I battle this line of there's people who honestly would see something like a brother becoming Catholic, and they would be honestly scared for him, like, oh, no, like I need to help you because this is it. So it's like, I think there's some people who truly believe that their heart for that matter is to help and to save them from something.
Sure.
So we get in this thing where if we give acknowledgement, like you printing the picture and saying, hey, cool. If we do that, then we're just entitling them to something that could be wrong. So I feel like that's where that tension comes in. It's like that, well, I want to be supportive, but if I'm supportive, then I'm almost
enabling this
exactly
destructive behavior.
It's too risky.
Yeah.
It's too risky.
Exactly.
Well,
Too risky. You're afraid.
And I'm
for
not
the-
saying wrong. I mean,
No.
I'm not saying that's mean.
He's one of my closest friends, and I've never seen him this way. My mother called me and said, I've never seen him this way. Fasting, weeping, praying.
Wow.
He doesn't do that. That's not
Yeah.
my brother at all.
Yeah.
And he's not the same person he was a year ago.
Yeah.
And God, it's Jesus is what it is.
Yeah.
So more power to him. I say anyway.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm not saying
No, I know that.
specific
No.
case. I'm saying in a general.
And I'm not saying that you should take that approach against everyone that disagrees
Oh.
with you. But I'm saying this specific issue, like
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the goal is
people.
relationship. Any other potential goals? Why you would do this? Some people would do it so that they can make a better argument for themselves. I mean, some people are intellectually honest.
Yeah.
Yes. That's rare, by the way.
Intellectually honest. It's like I'm willing to hear everything, but then I'm just gonna use it to reinforce my own place. You know, that's a goal. The reason I ask the question is this is what being proposed here on a theological level is also true on a personal level. It's not just about theological issues. When you're sitting across the table from somebody who differs from you on something very basic, or you're just disagreeing, you're not meeting eye to eye. The best approach is the same approach, to fully hear what's going on. Because what we've already said is there's usually something under there. Usually something under the construct. I find most constructs to be built on fear. There's something you're afraid of. You're afraid of looking stupid. You're afraid of not having the right theological answer. You're afraid of being wrong. There's something. Everybody's got it all. It's a little bit of a pessimistic view, I understand, but there's usually something going on. I'm going to call on you in just a second, Peter. I want to just give you a tool. This is where I'm headed. Because that's true in every environment we're in, I want to challenge you that whenever you're hitting with somebody, for whatever reason, it doesn't have to be negative. You can feel that. This is a very random number. Have 3 conversations with that person or 3 meetings before you give your opinion at all. Don't presume that just because you listen for 10 minutes or even an hour that you have it. Trust me, you do not have it. You don't have it. And you're being tested, whether they know it or not. Because it is about relationship. It is almost always about relationship. And they're trying to see if you really hear me, if you really understand what's going on. Because in some cases, they want to even confess. They're afraid. And there's something that they want relationship, and they want to share it, but they're not going to share it if you're a person who has a strong opinion or you have a way that's right. I'm telling you, 3 times. It is hard. It is hard to come back and go, tell me more. Just hold off. But it is amazing when it happens. Because you'll know when it does. Tammy and I have this phrase. I'll say, so-and-so unpacked the bags today. It's like we've been waiting, with this conversation, and it's like it's a privilege. It's a joy when someone finally goes. They put it out there, but it won't happen if you're just waiting to give them the answer, even if you're right. See, this is the thing. You got to understand you got to figure out again. What is your resistance? Remember we talked about it earlier, and then what is your goal? If your goal is to fix them, tell them where they're wrong, help them to avoid that in the future, you're going to be too quick and you'll never get to the relationship because, trust me, there is something beneath the argument. There's something beneath the mask. There's something beneath the theology. There's something beneath there is something there that is much more valuable, and they want it too. But if we just, and I'm pontificating here,
Please
I realize.
pontificate.
The other reason that we have theologies and that we fix things and that we have our answers is because the relationship part is an improvisational, risky, messy place. And we would rather just get along at a superficial level. So we all just, here's who I am, here's who you are, we're not going to go any deeper than that. We'll just agree to disagree. And we stay at this sort of comfortable space, distant from one another, theologically, personally, everything. Until someone comes in and says, I'm willing to spend all my energy to understand you.
And the point you're making extends to this, that when you think this way, you have to fight with yourself not to make it yet one more technique, one more form of manipulation. Well, okay, so I have to listen for 3 times. No, it's the person. If you're into this kind of reading, John Paul II wrote an article which the English title of it is Personhood. I'm telling you, that will blow you away. You can
title
find it
blows
in
me away.
English,
It's
and
awesome.
It is an awesome piece of work.
Yeah. Peter, sorry to put you off for so long.
Right. Past life of mine was being trained on counseling crash victims for airline crashes. And we went through several weeks of doing empathy exercises of just listening and playing back. And it is not natural at all. And if I would, most of my suggestion is you actually get together and you practice it. Because it is really tough.
It is tough.
Because you just want to interject and start saying, yeah, I know how you feel.
Or fix it.
I know how you feel.
You just lost your mother, father, and brother.
I know how you feel.
And that was just simply my point.
And then let me tell you a story about how, I do know more than you do about this. So here's a thing. I completely concur. Here's an occupational hazard, though. I try to practice this a lot because it's counter to me. And what I often find is I rarely will tell you what I think on something. And so a lot of people think I agree with them. Because I just listened and I smiled and nodded and didn't say anything. So it becomes, so that's a problem, because sometimes I'll hear people say, Pavi thinks that. I'm like, I don't think that at all.
I didn't say that.
No, not at all. I really don't. Don't push me into that corner. I'm just hearing what you're saying, So that's one thing, because you need to have clarity at some point, and sometimes you do have to have that.
There are things that are true and things that are false.
Right, there are, absolutely.
We're not saying that nothing is true. We're saying that you have to value the person.
Yeah. Here's the second thing. When you look at the Gospels,
what was the first thing?
At some point, if you only listen, then they assume that you agree with,
The occupational risk.
Yeah, that's it's an acceptable risk. As far as I'm concerned, I'm totally fine with that. I'd rather take that risk than lose the person any day. In the Gospels, I see 2 markers of the followers of Jesus. There are probably more, but 2 stick out in my mind. What comes to your mind as a marker of a person who follows Jesus in the Gospels? What do you see?
Obedience.
Obedience? Okay, that's okay. Where do you see that?
When the Holy Spirit told them to do something, they didn't.
Okay.
Like Jesus said, if you obey my commands, you will be my friends.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Yeah, the 2 dominant ones that I see are that the first marker is that you trust Him. Is that fair? That's the fundamental issue, is you trust Jesus. Not things about Him necessarily, but you just trust Him. He tells Peter, hey, come, step out of that boat, come to me. He tells Thomas, hey, so there's a core part is believing Him. It's not believing in Him, things about Him, things that people have said about Him. No, just trusting Him, which is a very vulnerable place to be. It really is. To live out of that is scary because we fail so often. We don't know if we're hearing His voice. It's a scary place to be. That's one. A second one that I see that's very dominant is that you love each other. By this will all men know that you are mine, if you have love for each other. And the obedience really flows out of that. Those are very important markers. They flow from these primary things. And if we do that, then what we've been talking about fits directly into that. There's a vulnerable place where I feel like what he wants for me is to hear your heart. What he wants me to offer you is that compassion, that listening ear, and then you can take it from there. Okay, I want to switch to a whole different flow. Is that okay, or should we stay here for a while? I want to switch to David and look at his story a little bit. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. This is going to be a big swing. So you know the David story.
We need a break?
Yeah, need a break?
No.
Well,
Yes.
Yes.
No, yes.
No.
Let's talk about that. How do you feel about that?
We only got 20 more minutes.
Oh, never mind.
Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. So David is this amazing figure in the Bible, larger than life. There's more written about him than just about anybody, really. It's all over the place, right? Shepherd, mystic, he's a poet, musician, warrior, lover, king, all kinds of really great stuff. And he had a kind of relationship with God that, I don't know if any of us, that the passion with which he pursued God is amazing, that intensity. The Psalms give us such a powerful read into his heart. I can honestly say there have been times of clinical depression in my heart where I would not have survived if it were not for David's prayers. The raw authenticity, you know. Yeah, he's comfortable telling God, you said you'd be there for me, and I did what you told me to do, and you are not there for me. I am righteous, and you are not, God. You know, who talks to God like that? You know, where are you? You know, so there's I feel like his prayers from 3,000 years ago gave words to my own pain, so I could learn to live more authentically, you know. But I want to look at maybe a dark part of his life today. This is a side that we don't often take a look at, and I want to do it because part of our journey here is to pay attention to everything in the text, not just the easy bits, the good bits, and the preachable bits. Right? So when we look at this, I would urge you to look at the dark places in David's life with the kind of gentleness that you'd want for yourself. Sometimes we can be harsh with a character in the text that we wouldn't want that harshness towards us. So it's a little gentleness, a little respect. So I have 3 little bits from his life. Here's the first one. It's really a strange one. As you read through David's story all the way through, you realize that everybody loves David. You notice that? I mean, if you look at 1 Samuel, I'll just list a few. Saul loves David, clearly. Jonathan loved David as his own soul. This is all in 1 Samuel 16, 17, 18. It says, all Israel and Judah loved David. Saul's daughter Michal loved David. All the king's servants loved David. David's warriors, his mighty men, loved David. The king of the next country, Hiram, loved David. And topper of God loved David. You got, I mean, none of us has anything even close to that.
Bathsheba.
Well, maybe she had a choice, maybe she didn't, who knows? But here's the striking thing about the whole David story. Not even once is it said that he loves anyone.
Yeah.
Not once, ever, any place. He says he loves God. In the Psalms, he certainly expresses that. You can see that. You know, you'd imagine he loved Bathsheba, but we never told that. He saw her, he asked about her, he sent for her, he took her. Those are 4 verbs in that whole story. You know, when their son dies, right, after, he comforts her, but it's sexual. There's no anything going on there. It's a sexual comfort, really. Then you think about Jonathan and David, you think that there'd be some love there, right? They were like, but the striking thing is at Jonathan's, the eulogy that David, beautiful thing that David sings about Jonathan, he says, your love for me was better than the love of women. Now says my love for you, or I loved you, or I miss you, and none of that. It's always that. The Bible is brilliantly written. It's sophisticated. It's not just some peasant scrabbling on a cave wall or something. It's very sophisticated text, you know. It makes a point in very subtle ways. And so when you read the story and you see this guy whose life is filled with popularity and fame and success and achievement, this guy that everybody loves, a guy whose life is filled with friends who will do anything for him. Remember that? The mighty men broke through into Bethlehem to get some water from risking their lives just because he wanted a little water from that well. Everybody loves him, and his life is filled with women. I'll look at that in just a minute. Everybody loves David, but he is never spoken of as loving anyone. What is going on, do you think?
Is it common with other characters that you see that actually come out?
Great question, yes.
So it's not a literary issue where you
No,
just
this,
don't say
this
that.
is intentional.
Okay.
This is intentional. They are telling the story of the greatest of their kings.
Is it a cultural thing for men? Is it wrong for a man to say, I loved another man?
No.
Because he's only saying, so that's not something.
Jonathan is very comfortable saying it.
Could just be
Everybody.
they didn't have a full grasp of what that love was. I mean, if we're talking, if we're talking about David, I mean, he worshipped God in the sense of atonement and sacrifice, where in a time where you go to a temple and you offer up something and you then receive, your forgiveness. And so, without Jesus, with the absence of true love shown from, Jesus to anybody he healed or the people that he came across, and the tax collectors and the prostitutes, and without understanding what that love fully was, maybe it's just they didn't know what it was. They couldn't put that into words. I don't know.
I hear that, yeah. It's possible.
Maybe he just had a hard time loving. I mean, maybe it is what it is. He
Right.
was not a loving dude to other
Isn't
people.
that-
He was charismatic, and people could love him
Yeah.
because he was not a loving person.
Or maybe
Isn't
he
that
just had a
something?
tough time
How do you feel
expressing
about that viewpoint?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Maybe it's just
On
as
the face of
simple
it,
as that.
it's simple as that.
Yeah.
And they make a strong point of it because no one else is spoken of that people love him. Like this. This is the most loved character. It's vivid in the text. And then he doesn't. So maybe he just wasn't a loving kind of guy. What does that feel like?
So there's something to. I mean, if you think about people who, I'm trying to think of somebody that I know that has a lot of friends who's liked by a lot of people. A lot of times those people they're at things, they're around things, they do a lot of things, but they don't necessarily give back the same thing that they receive. So it could just be a personality type thing. I mean, I know a decent amount of people who come off as very like they're in places and they know a lot of people and they're liked by a lot of people, but they don't necessarily give back anything that they.
The thing that makes the question so difficult is not that we don't know plenty of people who are charming and manipulative and take and never give. It's that the man's a hero.
Yeah. That's right.
We could cast him on the trash heap.
That's right.
But we can't.
You can't.
Well, not only is he a hero, he's described as a man after God's own heart.
Yes.
How do you do that if you don't love other people?
Yeah. There's the deep tension in that story.
Yeah.
He suddenly comes across as a user.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean just because you have stuff. He could have had a lot of pride. He could have just been a, egotistical guy that was very charismatic and people liked. That doesn't make him not love God or not be after God's own. It doesn't mean he can't do both. That he can't have sin in his life and love God and seek God with everything he is.
What about that bit in 1 John? But he says, guy says you love God, I don't love my brother, you're a liar. What about that bit?
Say that again?
Yeah, there's a bit in 1 John. It says if a man says he loves God but he doesn't love his brother, he's a liar.
But how do
It's
we
kind
know
of
that
brutal
he didn't
stuff.
love anybody else?
Pardon me?
How do we know that he didn't love? Maybe he just didn't have a way, maybe he
didn't
express it.
Well, it wasn't just him, though. That was the other thing. No one is saying
Yeah.
that David loved me.
Yeah. I think what he's saying is exactly right.
But that could be part
I
of
think
the
you're
story.
exactly right. But then there's another
No
tension
words.
now, right?
Right.
There's that tension, and you are escaping the tension. By saying maybe he didn't love people. Because the tension is hard to hold. Maybe
No,
he
I'm
did.
not saying, no, I didn't
Maybe he said he didn't know how to say it.
I
Oh,
said
not
he
to
didn't
say.
know how to express
Got it,
his
got it.
love.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
No, he may show their love through actions,
Oh.
right? And they're not necessarily
Right.
like, hey buddy,
I
I
hear
just
you.
love you,
I hear
right? But they show it in other ways.
Yeah.
But part of the point is,
We don't
no
see it.
one's saying that he loved them. No matter how he showed
It's not even
it.
demonstrated.
Your
If
kind
you
of
look at-
point is
yeah.
like, okay, no one's saying that this guy
Not of
loved
it.
me.
Not
We have
of
this
it.
whole book of him pouring out his love to God
Yeah.
in very eloquent literary terms.
Incredible.
So I don't know that he wouldn't know how to do that if he's doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that. I'm just
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
Maybe he felt unworthy.
Yes.
Unworthy.
Express it.
To people.
Yeah.
But to God.
Unworthy of
he-
the love that people were giving.
Okay. I'm going to leave it for you to think about. This is actually worth reflecting a lot about because it'll poke into your own heart. I guarantee you that. As you reflect on it, I'm going to leave this one as a tension that you have to reflect on. Is that okay? I want to move to another one. David and Bathsheba. That's a peculiar story, right? The weirdness is amazing. So he sees his woman, and he wants her, but she's married. He sends for her and takes her anyway, and she gets pregnant. Now he's got a problem because the man, her husband, is fighting David's war for him.
Yeah.
And so he goes and has that guy sent back, brings him and sends him home so he can sleep with his wife so that the baby's fatherhood is not in question. Very clever. But this Uriah guy is so faithful to David, he says, I can't do that. All the other soldiers are being celibate right now, I can't, so he doesn't sleep with his wife. That frustrates David, so he tries to make him stay for a few more days, hoping that he'll actually, sleep with his wife, and the guy doesn't do that. So then David writes a letter to Joab, the commander of the army, and sends it by the hand of Uriah, saying, put this guy in the front where the battle is fiercest so he can die. He sends his death sentence by the man's hand. The man for God's own heart. You just want to keep that in mind. And so he sends it, and Uriah gets it, and he takes it to Joab. Joab sees it, sticks him in there, the guy's killed. End of a beautiful story. And then David sends for Bathsheba, brings her as soon as the days of mourning are done, and she becomes his wife. They have a son, the son dies, they have another son, that's Solomon. The story just keeps moving on. Jerusalem at this time is about 1 square mile. It's not very big at all. And this is what the king did. And you think anyone didn't know what the king was doing? You think this was all in secret? No way. Everybody knew it, including David's 8 other wives and his other 19 sons that he's already got. They're all in the palace. This is all happening in public view. And the story is given to us in very brutal, direct terms. There's no minimizing any of it. So then I want to go to a story that comes right after that. Right after the story, you hear about Amnon and Tamar. Do you remember the story at all, Amnon and Tamar? So I'm going to read it to you. Just listen, okay?
Where is it?
2 Samuel 13. This is right after the Bathsheba story. And the way the story is told, we are to infer that this happens after that and therefore because of that. That's the way the story is written. So in the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. So half-sister. Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had an advisor named Jonadab, son of Shimea, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, why do you, the king's son, you can do whatever you want, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me? Amnon said to him, I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. So go to bed and pretend to be ill, Jonadab said. When your father comes to see you, say to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight, so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said, I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread. Is what it says in English. I want to come back to that later. I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight, so I may eat from her hand. I'll just tell you what it means right now. In Hebrew, it really means aphrodisiac. Literally. I would like my sister Tamar to come and bake me an aphrodisiac bread. He's telling his father this. David sent word to Tamar at the palace, go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him. So Tamar went, what?
You late for your karate class?
I'm just going to check on that.
So David sent word to Tamar at the palace, go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him. So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in a side, and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him with the bread, but he refused to eat. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said. So everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food here into my bedroom so I may eat it from your hand. And Tamar innocently took the bread she had prepared. Though innocently is complicated too. If it was an aphrodisiac, did she know that?
Right.
I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, wow is right. And she took the bread and brought it to the brother Amnon in the bedroom. When she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister. Come to bed with me, my sister. Not Tamar.
Wow.
No, my brother, again, brother. No, my brother, she said to him, don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where would I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You'd be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you. We know Dad will do whatever he wants, so it should work out. But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. This is psychologically common, actually. This pattern is not uncommon. In fact, it says, in fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, get up and get out. No, she said to him, sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you have already done to me. But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, get this woman out of my sight and bolt the door after her. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing an ornate robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornate robes she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. The word of the Lord. What is going through your heart when you hear the story? What are you thinking?
There's no way in Jerusalem everyone would have known what happened.
That's right.
Culturally, what she did at the end, everyone knows something happened.
Exactly.
They knew something had happened.
Yep.
Whether they know who did it,
Yep.
she's rented her robe, she's weeping, something happened.
It's public. Yep.
It's so horrific it actually didn't happen.
Say it again.
It's so bad it could not have
Could not
possibly
have
happened. It's just an
Yeah.
allegory.
Yeah, yeah. It is so utterly bad. Yeah. There's no redemptive anything in it.
There's no redemption in it then, right then, but that doesn't mean that there's not later, or that, God doesn't deal with each one of them and redeems things
Yeah.
if they seek it and ask for it.
Yeah. So you know how the story continues?
No.
Absalom doesn't do anything. This is Absalom's sister, Tamar. Amnon is the first son, so he's got power. So Absalom does nothing for 2 years. He's quiet. And then after 2 years, he tells his father David, I want to throw a banquet for my brothers. Can you tell them to come? If you tell them, they'll come. There's tension there, right? Unspoken tension between Amnon and Absalom. And so he throws a huge party, and all the sons of David, including Amnon and many others, come to it. And when they show up, he has a party and then massacres all of them. He kills Amnon. And then he goes into, he rebels against his father and gathers up an army against his father. And then he throws David out of Jerusalem. David flees. And then Absalom comes back into the city and takes David's women and sleeps with them publicly on the rooftop. So everyone knows that I am doing to my father what he allowed to happen to my sister. And then David ends up sending Joab after him, and Absalom is killed, and the story ends like that. So Amnon's dead, Tamar is never heard of again, and David sent his own people to kill his own son. That's it. That's dark.
Awful.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And then here's one more exciting thing about David. These are the stories that end David's life. These are stories we never preach or hear, because what are you going to do with these stories? So now David's on his deathbed. This is the third story I want to put in front of you. So David's on his deathbed, and now here's where the redemptive part comes in, right? On your deathbed, you're going to fix things. And so, for 2 Kings 2, he makes 4 directives on his deathbed. When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. I am about to go the way of all the earth, he said. So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. So far, so good. This is excellent advice. This is obey God. Then it starts turning weird. Now you yourself know what Joab is his commander, his right hand that he's trusted. You shall know what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me. Deal with him according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. In other words, kill the guy. But show kindness to this Barzillai who supported me when Absalom rebelled, so take care of him. But then there's Zaghe, Shimei. As David fled, this guy stood and cursed David, and mocked him. So when David came back after conquering, defeating Absalom, came back, he very publicly said, I'm not going to harm this guy. I'm just going to be gracious and all of that. And so he forgave him and said, I'm not going to do anything to you. And so he says, I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to death by the sword. I said that. But now you don't consider him innocent. You're a man of wisdom. You will know what to do. Bring his gray hair down to the grave in blood. So I swore I wouldn't touch him, but you can do that. So you kill him. Vengeance. That's about the last thing you hear out of David's mouth before, So I want a clean ending to the story. I want a redemptive turn. I do.
Anybody else?
This is David.
Right, when we're all, when he finished that story about Tamar, I looked around the room and almost nobody was looking at anybody else at that point. We were all like, you got to change the narrative of this thing, man. I can't even go on with my day, right? Good reason, too.
Yeah.
Some of it's hitting some of you way deep, right? Depending on the level of your own pain and how much you even relate to that story, you cannot leave it there. We can't live with that.
Yeah.
So close it up, Pavi. What's the debt?
There is a redemptive term that's very peculiar. It's very important. The final word on David is what Paul says of him 1,000 years later. You said it earlier. He's a man after God's own heart. So you got to stop and think, how can Paul say that? Because did Paul not know this? He certainly knew it. He knew there was nothing hidden here. And here's the crucial thought. David is defined as a man who God loves, not as a man who loves God. This is a man after God's own heart. God loves him. I think David gives me profound hope, because I think he loved God and he was screwed up. We would have, the DSM-5 would have names for David's psychoses. And I can name 2 of them right off the bat. They are clinical conditions today. And today a counselor would say there are things about David that can't be fixed. I'm going to give you those names, but there's some pretty bad stuff going on here. And he is screwed up, and he, at the same time, he's anointed by God, set aside by God, given everything that God could give him. He had everything. And he saw all of it and gave God thanks and then treated people in horrible ways. I do the same. I'm not different than David. David gives me permission to go into the darkest parts of my own heart, bits that I don't want to face myself. But that's true of me, and perhaps for you too. But at the end of the day, and there's something you can reflect on when any person receives the kind of power and adulation and gifts that David had, something bad happens.
Yes.
There's truth to that.
Yeah, Solomon right after.
Yeah. But But there's a story in the Jewish, in the tradition, Jewish tradition. It says that on the last day, God throws a banquet. This is the people of Israel are gathered together. This is the end. This is a huge banquet that God's going to throw. And He throws a banquet, and they have this great meal. And at the end of the meal, there's a cup of blessing that gets passed around. And before the cup of blessing is received, someone has to give thanks. Someone has to say thanks over the cup. And so then God says, Abraham, you pray over the cup of blessing. And Abraham said, I am not worthy. I'm a screwball, man. Look at my life. I can't do this. And then God looks at Jacob. Jacob is a non-starter, really. So he just passes the cup on by. Isaac seemed like a pretty good guy. I said, no, I'm not worthy. And then he just goes down. Moses, yeah, no, man. I tried to follow you, and look what happened, in the end. And then as they're going down the line, David jumps up and says, I'm going to do this. I am worthy. And he grabs the cup and he gives thanks. And the whole place is shocked because they know this David. And then God starts laughing because God realizes David gets it. Because our worthiness is not who we are. Our worth is simply that He loves us. And David is so screwed up that he can't stand on his own stuff. He says, I know you love me, and so then I'm worthy. That's the gospel, right?
Amen.
That's the gospel. And I feel like when you see this dark strain, the redemptive thing is that it allows you to go to the darkest part of who you are. There are things going on in your heart right now that you don't want anyone else here on this table to know about. It's a given for all of us, every one of us. We're afraid, we're embarrassed, we're freaked out because you think, yeah, you guys are loving and gracious and all that and cool, we don't have a box and all that, but if you knew this about me, suddenly there'd be a box and I'd be outside it. That's the fear, And there are bits of who we are that we won't even admit to ourselves. We are good at suppressing that. We close our eyes to it. But the truth of the gospel, the big story of the entire Bible, is that our good God sees all of it, sees it be at a level that you cannot even admit to yourself, and that He loves you with a wild love, an uncontrollable love. Having seen all the darkness in my heart, He says to me that His heart beats faster when He thinks about me. And that's the gospel. I think that's the redemptive turn in this whole thing. And if you and I can internalize that and live out of it, it's a different world, right?
Say that one more time.
If you and I can internalize how this David, stuff.
No, the one right before it.
Oh yeah, okay, so He sees you and He sees the darkness within you, bits of it that you won't even look at yourself. And God sees all of it, and then He says to you, when I look at you, my heart beats faster. I can't wait to be with you. And He doesn't see all the darkness that we're afraid of because Jesus died for. He's forgotten all that stuff. We are bringing things up saying, but God, look at me. And He said, I don't know what you're talking about.
I love that.
Yeah, I can't remember what you're talking about.
I do.
It's true. He doesn't see it.
No, I love the way that the words.
Yeah. That's the gospel. That's the deep and powerful. That's the one thing that I think you must stand on. This one thing you cannot compromise on. This is it. And that reflects who Jesus is, and then that reflects the heart of God across the board. Stop.
Thank you, Pavi.
Okay.
How do we apply it? I just went, oh my gosh, this is so great. I've never been in a church. I've taught that, but I've never been in a church that's actually done that. So a lot of stories that I have are personal, and what I want to say to you is, well, let me start with what we just did. What will you do with what we just talked about in the last 2 hours? So, is it possible that some of the stuff that you're learning here is not for you, but it needs to be from you? 2 Timothy 2:2, and trust to reliable men and women who in turn will pass it on to others. If it stays just with you, we failed. In other words, even leadership community, when we have it, and you come to leadership community, you are a conduit. Do you understand? Say we have 850 people in the church. There are 856 not here. For various reasons. They were called here, but You are given a special privilege to be here, to get it, to give it. And I think that a lot of times we miss that. You know, oh, this is great stuff, and, you know, this really helped me. Okay, good. But where does this go? And so some of what we're going to chat about today, and the other premise that I really believe in is that there is a ton of wisdom here. A ton. And so I like to do more processing, you know, than teaching. I ask a lot of questions. And so what you may get today may not be necessarily just for you, but it may be for the people you're leading. Because we're assuming you're all leaders, and quite frankly, I'm assuming you're a leader of leaders. So with that, let me give you just a couple things just to set the table, and then I want you to get in groups and share a little bit with each other. These are really unrelated, but they're related to evangelism. I have been influenced, and I think it was Billy Graham, and I can't find it, but some kind of percentage that there are at least, 30 or 40% of people in our churches that don't know Jesus. And I find that sometimes we make assumptions that aren't necessarily true. One of the gentlemen that was an elder at our church said that he was in another church, and he was either a deacon or an elder for 20 years. He wasn't a Christian. My daughter told me that she met Christ at 5. My son told me that he met Christ at 4. I assume my son was a Christian. He didn't become a Christian until his freshman year of college. So take that to church, and you say, is everyone in your life group a Christian? I know I've been in the last life group I was in, there were at least 3 or 4 that if I had to guess, I don't think they know Jesus. And so one of the things that I've been really impacted by, there's a guy that I work for down at Spanish River, and he would share the gospel every time he spoke. Every time. And sometimes it got a little rote. Jesus is God. He came to this earth. He lived a perfect life. He substituted himself in our place. He died on the cross, and he rose again. He would say some kind of mantra like that every time he spoke. And if somebody spoke and they didn't, he'd get up and pray it in his prayer. And so one of the things that I want to encourage you on when you're in leadership is think, should I share the gospel right now? In other words, should I share the gospel in life group? Should I share the gospel? You know, and this is not ironic at all. The guy who I worked for passed away, and thousands of people stood and said, David had impact on my life. Some of those people would say it's because of the gospel they presented every week. It finally clicked. The Holy Spirit finally regenerated them, you know. And I went to David one time and I said, why do you do that? What do you think his answer was? Good.
To remind himself of it.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
What did you say? To remind himself.
Yeah.
The power of numbers.
The what?
The power of numbers.
Powers of numbers. What's that mean?
You save enough times.
You save enough times and.
Oh. Yeah. Okay.
It'll land.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean.
Anything else?
Control purpose.
His answer? Huh?
Don't assume everyone's a believer.
Yeah. Well, he certainly assumed that. Yeah.
Well, even believers need to hear the gospel too.
Yeah. Yep. His answer was Romans 1:16. The power is in the gospel. The power is not in a great speaker. The power is not in a great, orator. The power is not that you have every jot and tittle when you share Jesus Christ. The power is in the gospel. And I went, oh.
Good answer.
So it has deeply impacted me. Most of the stories I'm going to tell you have really hit me hard. I am not an evangelist. I have not led a ton of people to Jesus. God has placed me in churches and organizations that the only goal is the gospel. Young Life. Well, we did. And other churches were kind of Willow Creek oriented that, reached out to seekers and all that kind of stuff. One of the reasons that I gave you these verses is because this had a powerful impact on me. My history has been that I could never understand why everybody didn't think like I did. And even when I got married, I couldn't understand why my wife wasn't the same as me. And so things like, and you're going through this in ELI, things like the Myers-Briggs. And I finally figured out that my wife would say, because she didn't know anybody at the party we went to, within 10 minutes she said, "Are you ready to go?" Rather than assuming she wasn't a Christian, which I did. You hear that? I'm going, what's wrong with you? Do you know Jesus, for crying out loud? Honestly, I'm not kidding you. And I finally figured out that introverts and extroverts were different. And I went, oh, how stupid could you be? Same thing with spiritual gifts. The Corinthians passage says that you get spiritual gifts just as the Holy Spirit determines. So you've been given certain gifts because the Holy Spirit said, here, I want to give you these. These are for you. Not necessarily. So one of the things that I have struggled with is that many times we try to make everything a cookie cutter. So let me give you the most profound example for me. And some of this is just because I'm old, okay? But growing up in a very tight church, which is why this one's so much fun, because I rebelled against the tightness. But my dad said to me, he said, Gary, for you to really be the Christian that you ought to be and be the witness that you need to be, you need to get a pretty significant Bible, like size-wise. And you need to carry it on the top of your books at school. And I think I had a pretty tender heart and really wanted to please Jesus. And so as a sophomore, I got a Bible and carried it every day. And the problem was, nobody talked to me. And I'm a pretty relational guy, And I finally figured out that was really kind of a stupid strategy for me. And it's kind of like I'm not a computer wizard at all. It's kind of like God saying, I don't care whether you're a computer or not. I want you to do this, Gary. Just do it. And I found out, which we always say, but then we have to realize it again, one size does not fit all, right? But how many times do we do that? Our little church in Baltimore ran out to Willow Creek. And we went, we want to learn from you guys. And we came back and did it exactly like Willow Creek did it. And guess what? It didn't work. We had to contextualize it. And that's partly what we've been saying this morning, is how do you get in those situations and listen and contextualize and hear, and the Spirit's gonna move. So what I'd like to do, probably I've forgotten a couple of things, but I'll pick them up later. What I would like to do is for you to just sit with the group that I had and just chat about what you observed, just some things, And then if you had to identify the style of that particular evangelistic story, what might that look like? What would that be? If you could do it even in one word, what would that be? So you get in your groups, chat with each other, and then we'll debrief that in the group as a whole. And you got a little deal there. You can write out notes if you want to. Again, I'm a fan of notes because this isn't just for your head. Sometimes if you write it down, you'll pass it on better. Okay? All right. I'll give you about 10, 15 minutes. I'll blow a little whistle.
It's really a lot more than it actually is. I think it's ever really
Sure. So I just jotted down 3 things. 3 things were, first of all, that Jesus spoke to a woman, rare Samaritan, which kind of points out to that is not common. I read something in my study Bible that said that talk to Samaritan people, it was like uncleanliness, so that type of being. Then I just noticed he mentioned being filled 2 different times, with the water and her thirst, and then with the hunger and the disciples with the food that they ate. And then she said she believed because he told me everything I did. So it was like because he said you're sleeping with 5 guys, like that's why she believed. So I thought that was right.
Yeah, that's why I thought of something like that. I love how you talk about it. It's slightly different. I always get something like
I know, right? Yeah.
But I was really, he took the time, and like you said, like that was kind of my whole point too. He took the time to notice the Samaritan woman. It was pretty much an asked her immediately, and he took the time to notice her. Something else that I was reading here too is that he came at the 6th hour, which was noon, and it was talking about how typically women came in the morning or in the evening, and she purposely came in the middle of the day to get away the congregation with everybody else because she wanted to avoid the shame of
Good works in
That's crazy.
I didn't know. I try to like dumb it down to like style it and I don't know, I just came with like loving the people who love me. So like no one else would have done so well. It made a note most Jewish people don't and then also how good is. Like obviously Jesus can do whatever he wants, but like for a person, you use your spiritual gift at certain times, not for you, but for someone else. And then contextualize that, like using the living water thing, because like you're hanging out, well, let's talk about how water, and then we related that to talking about pure hope.
It's actually the guy that
and that's what I didn't write it down, but talking about if you're doing any personality different styles, that confrontational type, evangelistic, very pointed, or the relational, or that, and that's what I was going to is more of a relational,
That's a misstep on Adam's part.
what I love what Pavi says when she's sitting naturally listen and about her
But it would have been easy for him just to like.
So it was
just
really
go up there
interesting.
and say like, you're sleeping around, you're a sinner, you're gonna burn your house.
right, but instead just you're getting hotter. I can
He's called me. I think called Joe
The blinding is a testimony. It's
It's so cool how like how this was, obviously she's not passing, she's going there at noon, she's going to around other people, but then Jesus, she believes in Jesus, and then she goes and tells them and they all go. So it's like,
You got it all
she
figured
ends
out.
up
What he's always trying to do is everybody's like,
leading other people to Jesus.
He's not, it's not the Pharisees, it's not the religious righteous people, it's
Everybody knows what's
those people go back and share Christ said, you're clean, I've washed you. How much more powerful that message is when they saw that. They saw her be,
I figured out again how I deal with this.
So I guess the thing is, we need to know more about darkness, right? And so did you actually read about that?
I know you're tired. I almost texted you. Thank you for
Hello, anybody out there?
Okay, so there's Pat here. Did we talk about Dorcas any part in the Bible?
I've never seen it ever again, no.
No, except for that, just that.
Yeah.
Dorcas.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever seen Dorcas other than that one passage? No, I haven't either. Yeah.
That's just my favorite name in the Bible.
I know. Tabitha, but I like Dorcas.
Yeah, I used to know Dorcas.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, that's just not right. Really. I don't know what they're thinking. Hey, here's a biblical name that not many people are using.
Right.
But there's a reason for that, honey.
Right.
Pastor's daughter, Dorcas.
Like to be a fly on the wall at that between the husband and wife.
Yeah, you know there's no agreement there.
Yeah, right, there's no. Okay, so we know that there's nothing more here to that, in here to give us reference to her.
No.
So.
No, it's, yeah.
Basically.
So Justin was over there today. And he was doing some work and then he came back into this. He's like, come on. And I kept going. I don't know. I was really tired. And I just didn't.
Were you going to ask? Right. I didn't know if there was something else I didn't know about.
What do you want?
It's okay.
And I said,
like, I say you're probably we had that whole thing even again of inheritance work. They had a specific place where they had to go.
See, that's the part of
where he's talking about.
Essentially, that's what it was.
It's really cool to
even
that's why I like reading. The more I
More comes out.
yeah. Well, and then also just even coming from
It's the hardest part.
I would have expected you to say the other thing, just because it's probably an argument in your own mind, because you know this is good. You don't want to stop it, but you keep going.
I used to have that. When I'm doing that, I talk about particular passages. I put them in groups and these two guys so I just make some observations about the relationship. And I just want to
Yeah, we know. See, that's the interesting thing is that he's saying about God until
Okay, 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes.
I'm not. I feel like you're
I gotta run to the office a minute.
So like,
Been there already. I was there.
but I'm just like naturally
Thank you. Coming back.
Penguins went down again last night, did they? Overtime again. Second overtime.
I so have not followed them. I'm so not following basketball. I just love that.
I'll watch the Spurs if they make it. I like the Spurs.
They may make it.
Yeah, I always kind of dread that day. That's how I kind of like when Pavi or
the difference is in peers is
talk about
Okay, got it.
it's kind of interesting because you kind of set that up with like when you're in a relationship, you and me have 2 conversations just what they think about religion and how to meet it up. So we actually shift everything like that. That's nice to have.
I gave these 2 guys.
To me, it's nice to have like a number with it, so it can be like, not that that's ultimate 3rd time I'm sure in the odds, but like at least to have like a game plan for like I'm going to win this.
Yeah, that's always kind of in the back of my mind that we want to share it, but it's like,
You don't want to ruin the relationship.
right, there are some ways about that.
There's a story,
But then
it would stretch it.
I think there are some family because I tend to really just continue to like
What's it?
so it is, it's nice to have it's not that it's hard, that's the right thing to do. It's kind of a reminder.
Okay. You got the little sheet there, and if you want to jot down some notes from observations or whatever, these are fun passages. So let's start with who's the group that had X2 141? Who had that? Okay. Just give some observations. What do you see? Doesn't have to be a lot. Just go.
The Holy Spirit came for the first time.
Yep.
Comes of fire and people. It was obviously a big scene. So wind, noise, all of a sudden speaking in different languages and everybody understood. It was a scene.
Yeah.
A lot of power in this
Yeah.
passage.
Yeah.
Like that was like the whole thing. There's a lot of power.
Yeah. Yeah.
We talked about the group of people that were there. Based on the text, you don't really know, but it could have been all of Jerusalem that showed up at this event.
Cool.
And then, as Anne Michelle was saying, like when the Holy Spirit came, he didn't discriminate on who he went to, like based on the norms of the day,
Mm-hmm.
men and women,
Good.
servants and masters,
Good.
young and old. time that had happened, especially in that culture.
And then Peter got up and spoke as everybody crowded around, and he basically presented the gospel 3 times, kind of 3 different audiences.
Yeah.
That there was a significance in, there's the prophesied, this is what's going to happen, so anybody who knows the Old Testament, knows their history, that's going to speak to them, and then here's the group that witnessed it, and this is what happened, and this is what we've all just witnessed. That's kind of a different crowd. What was the third one? I don't remember the third one, sorry.
Oh, you talked about David.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone would have known who David was, regardless of whether you were Jewish or Galilean or Greek or whatever. They would have known who David was. So that was another group that he was trying to resonate with.
Good.
But in the end, it all came back to the same point of the gospel.
Yeah. If you were to identify a style from Peter, what might that be?
For this setting, I came up with it struck me as like a Billy Graham type revival type setting.
Okay. Was he shy?
No.
No? Was he bold?
He was very bold.
Yeah. Yeah, he said some pretty powerful language, like, let's see if I can put that. He boldly and directly challenged them. Listen to me. Some really fun language. You can name these others, but one of the things that I got this from was Hybel spoke about styles of evangelism. And these are some of the passages that he looked at. And if you really wanted to get into it, this book, Building Contagious Church, is they expand upon the styles and what are some of the pluses of the styles and what are some of the minuses. What he would say the style of Peter is confrontation. And can you think of anybody these days that might fit into that camp of just being bold and direct and right out there? Honey.
My husband.
Huh?
My husband.
Okay. Put down Chris Kelly. It's Kelley. Can you think of anybody that we,
All know?
Who?
That we all know?
Well, you think Mike does that in sharing evangelism? Yeah, I don't think so either.
I just wanted to see the look on his face.
I thought you were talking about a different Mike.
One of the guys that they bring in the book, and it just makes tons of sense to me, if you know him, is Chuck Colson. Colson, when he became a Christian, he was so bold. I mean, he'd get up there and just fire, and he doesn't get off the stage saying, "You think I was a little too hard on him?" He is very, very strong. What would be some organizations that would be more confrontational? Young Life? No.
In a good way or a bad way?
In a good way. No, in a good way.
And when you say confrontational, I also think of street preachers, corner preachers, right?
Okay. What would be an organization that would fit a little bit in that camp? Campus Crusade?
Campus Crusade.
Going into the, and saying, I want to tell you the gospel.
But can we define confrontational for a second then? Because I would say, and this is coming from someone who was in it and was an intern with it, that I don't know. I just don't like using the word confrontation.
Yeah, well,
that implies a negativity.
Yeah, and I don't think it does.
Okay.
In other words, I'm saying this very positively.
Okay.
I think this is who Peter is. I think the guy that I was telling you about down in Florida, he was very confrontational. He learned better how to be relational. But it's the kind of guy that, we'd go and we'd go to a restaurant and he'd go to the waitress, "Hey, Janie, what's your name?" "Janie." "Hey, why don't you come hear me preach?" And for me, I'm like, are you kidding me? It never was offensive to any of the Janies that he invited, ever. Ever. That's who he was. It's very natural. It was not offensive.
Okay.
I mean, you can be offensive in being confrontational, no doubt about it. There's pluses and minuses. But in Peter's case, I mean, he's always out there, right?
I once sat on a flight back from visiting a customer, this one of the customers, I sat down in my seat.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, do you know Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, uh-huh. She was good, then this will be a quiet flight. And if I hadn't, I would have hated to see
Yeah.
what that flight, I mean, thank goodness it was only a 45-minute hour-long flight, but she really was like gonna go.
Isn't that
in,
interesting?
and, like,
Yeah.
that was her captive audience.
Isn't that interesting? I'm going to share a story later.
My style, but must work for her.
Yeah. Well, maybe it doesn't. See, that's my point.
Yeah.
The carrying the Bible didn't for me.
Yeah.
But that's what I learned. And that was what I was told. So it's like, well, that's what my church told me to do. So like I do it. But it wasn't right. And some people, as you all know, and I fight the plague not being this, is some people who try to be confrontational, it's the way they learn. It's just awful. Get me out of here. I don't even want to talk to you. Right? Okay, let's look at the next one. Who's got Acts 17, 16 to 34? Okay. Some observations. Just.
I think one of the first observations that we made was the fact that Paul, had been dropped into Athens, so to arrived in Athens, and in the first verse, he's just like waiting. He's just waiting. He's observing what is around him. He's seeing kind of how the people there are living. There's the idols, which are distressing to him, but he's just waiting, which I think seemed very uncharacteristic.
Yeah, that's
for
good.
my view of how I see Paul.
Yeah. What else? This is a fun one. What else?
He presented the gospel relevant to them in their society.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's very sensitive to where they were coming from.
One of those things that struck me coming from the cultures I came from, which is very much surrounded in idols, is he didn't actually talk about the other idols. He only talked about the one with the unknown God. So he didn't say, hey, that's all wrong. He said, let me just tell you about the one you don't know about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I like that.
He spoke to the church, but he also spoke to anybody in the marketplace. He didn't kind of target one group over the other. Kind of good use of his time.
Yeah.
Anyone that would listen.
Anyone that would listen.
Yeah. If you could identify his style, what might that be?
So I called it ISP. I love in acronyms at work, so I think three-letter acronyms all the time. I called it Insightful Street Preacher.
Cool.
ISP. As in he didn't go in and present the gospel. He actually was insightful around.
Yes.
What we just talked about, being contextual.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
presenting the gospel in the context which they.
Yeah. That's even better than the one that I'm going to tell you. I like that one better. They deemed this an intellectual style, sitting with the Stoics and the Epicureans and being able to converse with the culture and a pretty heady culture. Who might you think of that would fit that camp?
Ravi Zacharias.
Okay, Ravi Zacharias.
Keller?
Uh-huh. That's a good one. Yeah, actually, he does a lot of that. Tim Keller.
Pavi Thomas.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that. He's got the brain, doesn't he? He's pretty sharp. He's okay, right?
He's coming along.
He's coming along. C.S. Lewis, Lee Strobel, A Case for Christ. I mean, he was an atheist, and and started studying the Bible, and the Lord did, and he's got a phenomenal brain, right? You'll see some tools out there. Another organization that does this that you may or may not be familiar with is an organization called Search. And Search has 9 questions that every non-believer asks, or they will ask pretty much those, and then they're always trying to get the question and then obviously take it back to Christ. Some of my friends have met Christ through Search, and what they'll do is they'll just get a bunch of non-believers in a room, and the believers will bring their non-believers, and it's like, ask me anything you want. You know, well, why? What about the people who don't hear about Jesus? And they've got that baby wired to the point that then they talk about Jesus and the gospel, and people meet Christ. It's a great tool. Willow has put out a similar thing where, what are the tough questions that non-believers ask? And I've probably got 5, 6 books in my office of really, really good stuff in a discussion fashion rather than, you know, just doing that. Josh McDowell, a little older guy, case evidence that demands a verdict, more evidence demand. And that, I'm not Mr. Intellect, and so when those questions come up, it's very common for me to say, that is a great question, Sean. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to do a little work on that. Let's come back and talk about it. One of the times I was in a small group, I guess this is kind of unrelated, but I was in a small group, and one of my non-believing friends in the group said, I am so ticked. I am just so angry. A couple kids had been killed, like 2-year-old kids have been killed down in my... I just don't understand. Why does God do this? I said, that's a phenomenal question. I love that. Let's do this. Let's, everybody, you can go to a pastor, you can go to a book, you can go to the Bible. Let's come back with our answers to that. What do you think happened? I got my little board. I said, okay, what'd you discover? The best answers came from whom?
The person asked the question.
He and his wife, both non-believers. The Christians really did a pretty poor job. Pretty poor. But see, now, getting back to style, that's my style. I am a question asker. I am not one to say, you know, this is it, and this is what you need to do. You'll see in the coaching thing, it's all about questions. That's what it is. I'll give you a little preface. There were 100 questions that Jesus asked in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Do you have the ministry of questions? He did. Who do they say they am? Do you love him? Do you want to get well? It wasn't because he didn't know the answers. You know. Okay, good. Very good on that. Let's go to the blind man. And I know we talked about this, and I heard all of your conversations. There may be some observations, but if you, who's doing this one? Okay, let's hear some of your thoughts.
Well, I think going with that questioning, he didn't know the answers. Like when people were asking him stuff, he didn't know.
What did he say?
I just experienced it.
Yeah.
I don't know who he is.
Yeah. Yeah, if you look at that passage and really study it, one of the things that he says over and over is, once I was blind, now I can see. Whoa, wait a minute. Was it your parent? Once I was blind, now I can see. You know, or, what did he do?
Told his story.
He told his story.
And the thing was, Jesus didn't tell him to tell his story. Jesus said, go to the pool.
Yeah.
He said, just go wash off your eyes.
Yeah.
And the man comes back, and John pointed out that, like, the point of this is that people saw that he was changed. People saw that he was different. And so they started asking him. They came to him and saw that there had been some type of change. And all the man knew to tell, like we talked about, is He only had his story. He only had
That's all
what
he
he
had.
had experienced.
That's all he
And
had.
he hadn't really talked to Jesus at this point. He hadn't really heard from Jesus or knew that who this Jesus was or what this man was. And he just all I know is I woke up one day and I couldn't see, and now I can see. That's it. That's all I've got for you.
We talked about the problem of pain as well, going back to Peter's story, where the disciples said to the guy, to Jesus, well, no, somebody sinned because God purposely made him blind for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't share your story to somebody about Jesus if they don't believe in Jesus, they don't believe God exists.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem of pain is a good way to get in there.
It's a good way, because it's your story.
Exactly.
They can't
You can
argue
say,
with it.
Right. And you could say, well, you know what? That's a great question. Why did God allow this to happen? That's awesome. Let's talk about it. Is God unjust by allowing this to happen? Did God cause this to happen? These are great ways to get into somebody who says, there's evil in the world. If God is good and he exists and he's all-powerful, he wouldn't allow the world to be this way. Therefore, I don't believe there is a God. Well, you can't share your story like that or gal. You've got to get in that door, and this is a good way to do that, I think. Problem of pain is foundational.
How many people met Christ with confrontational Peter? How many met Christ?
What did you ask?
How many people met Christ in the first story? 3,000. How many people met Christ in the intellectual one?
It just said a lot. A few became followers.
Okay, a few men became followers. Is this the one?
Yeah.
A few men became followers of Paul and believed. Also, a woman named Damaris and a number of others. So obviously these are working. How many met Christ in the blind man?
Just one, I can tell.
Who was that?
Him.
It was him. Yeah, isn't that interesting? They're still working on that. Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. If you've probably done this before, but if you haven't, I want you to do it. I would like for you, just get in twos on this one. So who was ever next to you, two. And I would like for you to take 2 minutes and tell your story. What was it like before you became a Christian? How I became a Christian, and since I became a Christian. And then I want you to switch it so that you get to know each other a little bit. Some of you will do very well at this, and you can get it in 2 minutes. Some of you will struggle. That's something you can work on, because it's really good to have your story in that short a period of time.
Say that. What are the three things?
They're on your sheet. They're on your sheet. Before, what was it like? Okay, let me give you an example. I was very young before I became a Christian. I just, I didn't know much, but what I did know is that I needed something. And when I went to camp and they shared about Jesus dying on the cross, and he did it for me, and he wants a relationship with me, I asked him to come into my heart. To be honest with you, I'm not even sure what all that meant, other than I knew that I needed to do it. What does it mean to me now? Since that time, my whole life has changed. Everything's around him. But I got to tell you, it's not that I'm perfect, because I mess up every day, and the nice thing is God never leaves me nor forsakes me. Blech. I didn't practice that because I want you to know it's just that way. I mean, you don't have to be perfect. I've written it out differently sometimes. So get in twos and just wing it. Go for it. Make it up. If you're not a Christian, make it up.
It's funny because at the very beginning, you share your story. Which is really cool. It's really interesting. You have to, it's not like a guidance, you have to go to the first one. I was like, I've never practiced doing this for somebody anyway, but I feel like I should just share what you're to share.
No, don't do that.
progression, you know, it's been a continuing process.
I love this.
Learning going on.
Don't say hi the same way to that person that they didn't know.
If the game's going to be canceled for weather. So I'm hoping they pull the trigger on this stuff quick because I know they're it's not so late this afternoon, so it could get to the point where they're so behind.
So mine, so before
Okay, your time's up. Switch.
I didn't get to share my story. So I grew up in a church, and I guess for me, growing up, it was always just like legalistic, like I have to be a good kid. I remember saying to my brother, compared to eternity, we're on earth for such a short time. I just have to be good for this long, but I get it. And so it was always about legalism and doing the right thing. And so then I became a Christian, just got involved with my life when I was in college.
See, it's supposed to be 90% rain starting at noon. By the time Shay's supposed to play, it's supposed to be thunderstorms and rain.
Christian community,
Around the world, guys, they don't call it to you.
that was unlike any other friendship that
The
I
thing is,
with
with lightning,
so different.
automatically they delay it 30 minutes. And so I think they're going to have to, by then they'll have to have fallen behind so far that they're going to have to start.
And so then late after becoming a Christian, I'm just kind of
At some point, you got to go to find that life there.
Going over to baseball team with my sister's daughter. And it just, yep, we're going. We're on. Boom! Okay, we're off.
30 minutes. You get to 25 minutes. Did anybody see that? Stop looking. Keep your head down. And it's going to clear up tomorrow. We may just have to say we're going to play late tomorrow because I don't think there are late games on Sunday, but today it's just there's a front coming. But the thing is, you have to leave at about. So I'm trying to decide whether or not.
Can they call you even if you're in route?
We have a real-time communication piece. Things happen, she'll get the word out. But I could send Shay with a friend.
Okay. Why would having your story down to a couple minutes be helpful? Why would it help you to have your story down a couple minutes before what happened and after? Why would that be a positive thing?
You don't always have 2 hours to tell somebody, nor do they want to listen.
Nor do they want to listen. Exactly. Let me tell you what I learned in this one. I talked to Mike and found out he wasn't a Christian, so I have him now on my list of 10.
Mike Smith?
Yeah.
Oh. You guys ready for it?
All right, let's go to the next one. What are we at? Woman at the well, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So, Women at the Well, the things that we kind of stuck out to us, Jesus spoke to a woman, which was kind of culturally out of the norm, and a Samaritan at that. And actually took the time to stop and talk to her in the middle of the day. I pointed out that, like, most people gathered the water in the morning or at night.
Yeah.
And so this woman came probably because she was an outcast, and Jesus had the perfect timing to go there at the same time.
That's cool.
Yeah, and we were also just talking about he talked to her about the living water, and he took the time, like you said, we're talking about the different evangelistic styles, Jesus, he did not point out that she was she had 5 husbands and that she was a sinner. He sat there and he talked. She was going to get water, so he met her where she was, and he took the time to say, you know, this water will not quench your thirst, but the living water will quench your thirst, and he talked to her about that. And so one of the other interesting things that we noticed, and he pointed this out, was that, yeah, he was very specific with where he went, that a lot of people would have gone around, and he went through Samaria instead of going around.
Yeah,
so
that's super.
yeah.
If you could identify her style or his style and what happened to her, what did she do?
You guys get us?
Anybody? Anybody?
Invitational?
She went into the town, said a peculiar thing. This guy told me everything I did. You know, it's like, that wouldn't be my first reaction.
Right.
But think about invitational for a minute. She went, she got the town to come and see this guy that is blowing her mind. And is there any merit to having a style of invitational? How does that work at Vista?
I got invited to Vista.
There you go.
For the first, been in church since I was 6 weeks old.
There you
no
go.
one's ever asked me to come to church with them. My wife and I were praying about coming to Vista. A guy I work with, Mark Jackson, said, "Where you go to church?" So we were praying about going somewhere. He said, "Well, you should come with me." I'm thinking, okay, yeah, whatever. I said, "Sure, where do you go? Vista?" And I was like, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." So we came.
Let me point out something obvious that you do so well. You ever invite anybody to the Christmas program?
Yep.
Are they going to hear the gospel?
Yep.
Does he intentionalize the gospel specifically for that? It's a great tool. It's a great style to invite people. Young Life, I mean, you can give 1,000 illustrations on that, but we try to get our campaigner kids to bring their friends so they can meet Jesus and come to camp. Come on, I'm going. Go with me. Interesting style. There's a little illustration here that I think they pointed out in this book. Dwight L. Moody. How would you characterize Dwight L. Moody?
Wow.
Is he like an evangelist or a preacher, or what is he?
He's a preacher.
Okay. Here's a story about him. He hired a pew. You know what a pew is? And it goes in a church. You sit in it. It's long. And they used to pay money for that, like where you sat. He hired a pew and went to the street corners, saloons, etc. He filled it every Sunday. Then he rented 4 pews and filled them with assorted guests. What a fun story. Isn't that interesting? Okay, let's, anybody become a Christian on that one?
Whole city. That was the last part that we were like, she went and told them what she was, and then they all came back to see.
And what's verse 39 say?
Many Samaritans from the town believed in him because of the woman's testimony.
Many. Isn't that fun? Okay, who got Luke? Who got Levi? Luke 5. Yeah.
One of our observations, and it's funny because Melinda and I took this like 2 different routes. When Levi obeyed when Jesus said, "Follow me," he like left everything and followed him. And so he talked, I mean, not jumping too far ahead, but I took that as a direct style of evangelism.
Okay.
And like Melinda took it as more of an invitational.
Okay.
Levi is just, he's calling him to be a disciple, but he's never referred to again as Levi, his name is Matthew. Jesus went to the sinners. He didn't just sit with the righteous, and so he met people where they were at. It's another thing we came up with. And repentance is for
Say the last thing.
Repentance is for all.
Okay, good. What would be the style? You said that it would be direct, invitational. Is there another style that might characterize this?
Levi served Jesus, so like he gave him food into his house, invited him to his house.
Okay.
So
Was Levi a tax collector?
yeah.
Kind of invited his buddies, didn't he? Kind of relational, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's an interesting one. That certainly this is what they deemed it as kind of a relation. Now these terms are just arbitrary. You can put something else in there and see, like you did. I see this. Yeah, good. What comes to mind when you think of relational?
Young life.
Huh?
Young life.
Yeah, young life. I mean, it is very relational. Is there a downside to that? There was when I was there, because I would relate them right into hell. Because I wouldn't, get to I'd take them to camp and let God do something. In fact, I was so stupid when I was in Young Life, I'd say, yeah, we got to get those kids to camp so they can meet Christ. Are you kidding me? What if they're supposed to meet him today, But there's a great example of a system. Get them to camp so they can meet Christ. I remember one time I gave a club talk. It was the worst club talk I've ever given. I remember going out. I was out in the woods trying to figure it out. I couldn't get anything, nothing. And so I got up. We did the song, we did the skits, all that kind of stuff. And I got up and I said, "All we like sheep have gone astray and turned our own way. See you next week." I was so destroyed. I mean, I was just wiped out. I was a mess. And all of a sudden, this gal comes walking up to me. She said, "I want to meet Jesus." And every bone in my body wanted to say, "Come back next week, I'll get you a better talk." But that's what God does. He just does stuff like that. And you're like, "Oh my gosh, that's the worst thing I've ever done." And God goes, "Oh, it's okay. Yeah, you're an idiot here. It's okay." All right, let's look at so you got Matthew parties. You've heard of those, where you get people in your neighborhood come together that relationally, and you have a little party. This is really why we have every other week for Life Group, so that another week you're out there inviting your neighbors, you're inviting your 10, inviting your, figuring out how we can reach out missionally. One of the things we're working through is, if we're really starting Hilliard missionally, and they don't know Christ and they never heard the message, what kind of group are you forming around that? Because there are groups that can be formed easy. I know when I used to run around and talk about life or small groups, one of the felt needs that really worked for mothers was toilet training. Because they were always frustrated with it. And you'd get them together and you did it and you worked it around and, we're getting together, and then they'd invite them to church or whatever the deal was. But it was a common, there are helicopter groups, there are people who work out in the workout room, all that kind of stuff. Okay, let's look at the last one. Dorcas. I love that name.
Dorcas.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll start.
Yeah.
Which one do I choose? We noticed. I went ahead and read a little bit ahead to see kind of what was happening before, because if you read just that short thing, it kind of seems just like it just seems like really random.
Perfect. Put it in context.
But the only thing I noticed that it talked about Peter had been doing healings was it Lydda? Did I say it? So Peter was in Lydda. It talked about him doing some healings there. So I made the assumption that because how close Lida was to Joppa, that there's probably word that was being spread of what Peter was doing. And then when Dorcas died, there's people who went and sent for Peter to then come there to heal her. So there's that.
Yeah, and so if I think if we were thinking about the evangelistic style, so there's really like we kind of broke it down here that so we have Dorcas, right? She was full of good works and acts of charity, right? And then we also have Peter, okay? So he performs a miracle basically, right? And then we also have the people in the town. Okay, so the testimony of that act, that of him coming together. So there's really, it's kind of packed in there that there's really kind of three pieces there. So I guess if we were just to kind of separate Dorcas out, right, we would say that she's more of a, she'd be a servant, right? So works of act in charity, right? She's more of a servant style. And then if we talk about the people in the town, then it would be more of a like a testimony, right?
Okay.
So it's really kind of packed in there. So, but he made a really good point, is that in this whole passage here, is that they don't mention the Holy Spirit anywhere in there, except for the very end where he says, and then. Right?
Yeah, the only place that God came up is the second to last line. It says, and it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord.
In the Lord.
But up until that point, there's really no mention of, from the time that
I was just
section
an interesting
starts.
Observation.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it, at least for what they were saying. It's servanthood. It's serving. Some of you are servers, and that's how, you get to show Christ, and I mean, you can see the obvious. They were distraught that she had died.
Right.
And so probably one of my favorite stories is thinking about a small group, or maybe 2 or 3 small groups. It was over at Lynette Streeters. And they were reaching out to someone who I think either had a fire or something like that, and she called you or somebody and just said, "I am overwhelmed. My hallway is full of stuff," and they took it over to this person. And you go, "Did that matter? I mean, we just gave them stuff." Yeah, it matters. We're being Christ, right?
Sure does.
And as you said, Sean said, this became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Now, that was Jesus, but where to start? Dorcas, just serving. And some people are just great at chocolate chip cookies, and some people, and we don't want to ever diminish that, There's a great ministry that I've heard of churches where they have a car ministry, and they turn in their cars, and then there's these guys who fix it all up, and they just give it to single moms. They just, here, we want to bless you. And it doesn't have to be a Christian single mom at all. It's like here. And they're like, are you kidding me?
We're just saying something about cookies. It makes me think. I'm not sure if anyone from Vista is part of this ministry, but there's a prison ministry, Kairos, and basically they bring in cookies. They have a lot of cookies basically, and they ask the congregation to basically bake cookies, and then they bring in all these homemade cookies to basically the inmates, and in that bringing cookies, it's like, hey, these people took the time to make you cookies.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, it's funny because of all the things that when they come back and tell you stories about what happened, it's funny how big of a deal the cookies are to the inmates.
Yeah. Okay, if you had to grab a style that we've talked about,
What was the last style? Sorry.
servanthood. So if you go confrontational, apologetic, read them off for me. I forget the order. Testimony. Okay, let's start with confrontational. How many of you, if you had to pick one, What would you land more in the confrontational? How many would do that? And obviously, remember, the confrontational is very positive. It's who you are. Anybody?
Our type of style?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. The next one would be intellectual. Anybody? Seriously? No apologetics? Cindy? Wouldn't you be there?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say I'm an intellectual, but
You come at it from a.
From apologetics and stuff like that. Okay. What's the next one?
Testimonial.
How many would say, man, that's me, Okay. And then the next one is relational. How many would say
there was invitational.
they're relational? Oh, invitational, sorry. How many, that's your bailiwick, man. You're inviting people to church all the time. Okay. John, I would say that about you too. What's the next one now? Relational? How many relational? All you young lifers or young life wannabes. What's the next one? Serving. How many would say serving really fits you? Okay, good. Now, I'm relational. Okay? What I want to ask you is, when did you share Christ that it wasn't your preference? Because don't box God in. One come to mind? Yeah, John.
I work at a place with a bunch of really college kids. I work at Apple. A lot of liberal, atheist type of green people, just fine. There's this one girl who's she's young. In my opinion, I think she had some abuse in her life. Very pretty, very loose, very open about that. I never really projected her. She's pretty vocal, kind of dirty. Good girl, very sweet, but it's just the way she is. A year and a half ago, she said, "Can you pray for me?" And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, I met a guy and I'm pregnant." She's 21. And she was like, "Just pray." And I said, "Absolutely I will." And I tried to be, I'm by no means this shining beacon of Christianity, that's not what I'm saying. But she came to me and asked me, and I did that. And she has, since we've had big talks, she got married to the guy. He's a good guy. He loves her. She loves him. They're trying to do the best they can. They have a little boy now. I've given her some books by Greg Boyd. We've talked about stuff, and she's thanked me. So I tried to do that. Didn't expect that at all. When she walked up, that's the last thing I expected to hear. She was like, "Can you pray for me?" And I was like, "Of course I can."
Cool.
So,
someone else. Yeah.
What's
your style? What would your preference be?
My preference is servanthood.
Okay.
The style which I hate and failed at was confrontation.
Okay.
Sitting in my grandparents' house, I'd come back from Hong Kong, was just visiting, was talking about what I was doing, and my mom, my dad, my grandparents just unleashed all hell on me. And I had no answer, and I just left the room in tears and cried. And everybody came and said sorry, except for my grandfather. And so, I'm not good at confrontation.
Has there been a time when God has called you to a non-preference? And I think, let me give you mine. Amy, it's so funny that you brought that one up. Because when I ride on an airplane, I have so much to do, and I just do stuff. I'm a doer. And I really don't want to talk to somebody that I'm never going to see again. I just don't. And I remember coming back from a conference, and I'm sitting in with these two ladies who are chatty Cathys, and they're just, "Hey, how you doing?" And I'm going, "Oh, this isn't good." And they said, "So, what's your name? And what do you do?" And the kiss of death is that you're a pastor. It's just awful. I shared the gospel. God told me to. I could not get out of it. I've seen him since. But lest we try to box or buttonhole, there's probably not a style that I hate any more than to throw something at somebody.
yes.
Like, here's a trap.
Yes.
See ya. And it ticked me off. guy that I went to seminary with and was down at Spanish River, Andrew Vuxick, in finances, a wheeler dealer, sharp dude, smart as all get out, and he's driving his car and he's at a stoplight. And a guy said, roll your window down, roll your window down. And he threw a track in, threw a, here's what the gospel is. That, that's what a track, something about Jesus. And he didn't read it right away. He was driving. He read it and met Jesus. I'm going, no. You're ruining it. So, we can't really buttonhole. I give you some more of my sins. I was at a Young Life weekend down in Virginia Beach. And I kind of took Young Life like I didn't want to be too religious because I grew up that way and I had it shoved down my throat. So I was really, let's be really sensitive to the culture of these non-believers. Too much so. So we're down in Virginia Beach and I just would get turned off over religious stuff. And we were at the beach and I looked and I go, oh, that's so stupid. Some kid had drawn a cross in the sand. I'm going, oh, come on, man. Can't you be more sensitive to these non-believers instead of doing all your religious stuff? 25 years later, I'm out here in Columbus, and this girl calls me. And she said, hey, I've been looking all over for you here, and I was in your Young Life Club. I don't remember. And she said, do you remember? Well, this is where I met Christ. We were at Virginia Beach. You remember the cross on the sand? I'm going, oh, jeez. That's when she met Christ. And that cross was significant to her. A couple other little fun deals, and then I'll close with this little bit. We were always trying to figure out why God moved us to Chicago. And we were there like 11 months. It was, our furniture got ruined on the way out. The job was kind of crazy, fun, learned a lot, but it was short term. And we're like, we didn't have to move to Chicago. We could have stayed in Baltimore. And every once in a while, Kim and I will say, I wonder why we moved to Chicago. And there was a guy that hung around Christy, her boyfriend, and he hung around our family. And
Christy, your daughter.
Huh?
Is Christy your daughter?
Christy, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And not my wife.
Well, I know,
No,
but there's just an arbitrary Christy through
Thank
two
you.
stories.
We're like, oh, okay.
This other girl.
And so fast forward. Again, what are we talking here? 25 years? And we were at the office at Vista. This was like last year. And we were at the office at Vista, and Kim and I were the only ones in the office. That's my wife, Kim.
Yeah, I know.
And, so we're there, and Kim says, Gary, I have so much to do. That would surprise you, wouldn't it? And I can't answer the phone. And I'm going, oh, I never answer the phone at Vista. Never. And so the phone rings. Vista Community Church. Gary? Yeah. He says, this is going to sound funny because this is his name. This is Guy. His name was Guy, funny name, Aroni. Guy. This is Guy. I'm going, Guy. This is Christy's boyfriend in Wheaton, Illinois. He says, I've been looking all over for you. I said, how did you find me? Through the internet.
Google?
Yeah, something. And I said, it's so nice to talk to you. He said, I just wanted to tell you how significant your family was to me when you were in Wheaton. And I remember we took him up to Kim's mom and dad's. And I remember exactly the road I was doing. It was a gully, and I looked at Guy. We were walking together because he had a terrible home, separated, the whole shot. And I said, Guy, do you know Jesus? Nope. I says, you want to meet Jesus? Yep. You want to pray now? Yep. And you know how sometimes you do that and you go, does it really take or not? I mean, is it the real deal? He said, and this is what he said on the phone. He said, your family has had such an impact on me. He became a Christian. He married a Christian. He said, I want you to know that my kids are going to carry on that from generation to generation to generation. That may be the only reason we went to Wheaton, Illinois.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
It's just bizarre. So, what's that all about? It's all about the Holy Spirit. It's really not us. I mean, he uses us, and we're grateful, and we can't box it in, because sometimes you're going to be sitting next to two chatty ladies, and you go, share the gospel, for crying out loud. Now, I want to end with this, and this is really something that I use, but I want to tell you how I used it last week, and I don't always share the gospel. This just happened to be last week. We have a guy come into church, visit, and his young life daughter brought him, and he's a mess. His family's a mess.
Bless you.
And it's, you can tell with him, he's just in consternation. He comes to, I'm in a book study, like studying the Word, with a group of guys, and somebody said, can I bring this guy? Sure, brought him. And he's just sharing his story. It's a mess. I mean, the more I listen to it, the messier it gets. And so he says, I love Vista, and I love your group, and it just makes me feel so good. And so Darginio and I, Rich, the regional director for Young Life, I just was feeling for this guy, and so I went over to his house one time, and he had some stuff going on, and so I went over and met. And so Rich and I said, let's just go for breakfast before church. So we went, and he's talking. He's a mess, just a mess. And then he's telling how great the Bible study is and how great Vista is, and I just felt compelled. You know how the Spirit does that. I mean, I'm not Mr. Confrontational, I said, this is going to really sound weird. Are you a Christian? Because he had all the Christianese stuff. He'd gone to Zenas and all that kind of stuff. And I said, are you a Christian? And he goes, I don't know. And so from there, shared the gospel. Okay? And he was a mess. I mean, he crawled out of that service, and he was just a mess. Called his daughter and all that kind of stuff. So I see him a week or two later. And it ended up, the group, it was just Darginio and I, which was really cool. And so I said, what are you doing? And somehow, through the way, I said, let me start with this. I know, I don't want to use his name. I know, Charlie, that's not his name. Charlie, I know you know a lot more scripture than you think you do. Oh, no, I don't. I've done this hundreds of times with people who aren't Christians. I know you know a lot of scripture. I said, watch my little illustration here. Let's just assume this is God, and this is you, Charlie, right here. Okay? And when God originally made us, he made us to be in communion together, right? That's why he created us. Yeah. I said, now tell me what you know about the Garden of Eden. And not everybody will have an answer for this, but everybody I've done has had an answer for this. Well, they were in the garden, they shouldn't eat the tree, and he told them not to, and they did. And so I filled a little blank, and I said, you're absolute, see, you do know more about the Bible, and I thought, and he'll answer more too. And I said, really, literally what happened is, when they did that, when we did that, we turned away from God. This is a Young Life Illustrated. Some of you already know this. We turned away from God. And God tells us that what happens is that we've put a wall. We've created a wall And I say, pretend this jacket goes all the way there, all the way that way, and all the way this way. And there's just nothing we can do. There's a wall there. So what do? I don't know. Well, what do you know about Jesus? And, they tell about Jesus, he's a good guy. Well, what happened at the end of his... Well, he died on a cross. What happened there? Well, he died on a cross, and I said, you know what literally happened here? That wall, Charlie, was removed. Is this your jacket? That wall was literally removed. And I go in, I forgot all this, but I go into, that sin separates us for all sin, falls short of the wages of sin is death. And then I say, so, like, he paid for the price and he substituted himself, right? And he removed the wall. What's wrong with the illustration?
Well, they're facing the wrong way.
That's exactly what Charlie said. That they're going the wrong way. And so then I say, but as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God, so that we can be united in the way that we were originally created. And I said to this guy, I said, this is not a religion. This is a relationship. Think he became a Christian?
Yes.
He did not. I was with him last week, and he's a mess. Now, what's the problem? I don't think it's necessarily me. Doesn't the regeneration of the Holy Spirit have to touch his heart to move and lean in? Yeah, so sometimes I remember sharing the gospel with one of Jeff's friends down in Florida, and I shared the gospel, and Jeff said, how'd it go? Did you meet Christ yet? I said, no. But he went to a church down the road, and his life has totally changed. So I know you guys and gals have the same kind of stories, but they're just fun, aren't they? Aren't they just fun that God would even allow you to be a part of that? And we can look at styles, and I'm relational. I mean, I've related with people, and I'm out of the baseball. It's so natural for me to share the gospel because I know them. They know I accept them. And whether they buy it or not is not the problem. I'm going to like them anyway. So we look at those styles and we say, okay, here's what I don't think happens. I don't think, for the most part, God's going to tell me I have to be Peter. Now that doesn't mean that I won't be in a situation like that maybe, and hopefully I'll be all of what we've been talking about, Pavi, and loving and caring and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, I am relational. It's who I am. You talk to anybody that knows me, I'm relational. I am. I call my brother every day. I probably talk to you every day. Cindy and I meet tons of times because we're just relational. But the other thing we want to be really, really careful on is that we don't button it in and systematize it, because the Holy Spirit blows like the wind. And sometimes we can hardly tell he's there. And then sometimes it's rushing like something like X2. Man, what's going on? Well, it was so weird, they thought they were drunk. No, they weren't. Okay, a couple minutes. Any thoughts, any comments, any stories that would be fun to close this time? Yeah, Chuck.
Confrontational is hard for me because I went to a school where they gave you a 12-step program of exactly the words to say. It doesn't matter who the person was. The person's irrelevant. You just repeat these words, and they're going to, and I have to overcome, that's not what confrontation really looks like. Put that into my life. So sometimes we have to do that. And maybe those of us who've been burned, for lack of a better term, with one of these or other of these ways. Just like you said, there are a few things that bother me more than a telemarketer. Don't care who you are.
Yeah.
Could care less. Here's a spiel. I'll get it go away. Yeah. And that's very offensive if somebody does anything to me that way. Facebook, but people, hey, you want to buy this? No,
Yeah.
I don't want to buy this. Well, how rude are you?
Yeah.
You didn't even say, hey, how you doing? What's going on?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So we have to overcome and not say, well, I had a bad experience, therefore the Holy Spirit's not working in this vein in whatever way. And I struggle with that a lot.
Great.
I think it's interesting, and you kind of said that you felt that you need, was it with the last guy you said you felt God telling you that you needed to kind of give him the gospel message? So, growing up, my uncle, he kind of grew up in the church and then he went off, and he was young. He was like, of all of my uncles, he was very young. So I hung out with him a decent amount, and he knew I was a Christian, and we talked about church stuff a decent amount, and I was always kind of, just sharing with him. I was helping with a youth group who went to a conference and was talking about sharing the gospel and stuff like that, and God really put him on my heart that weekend. So I was like, I need to make an effort to just go and meet with him and just really just kind of lay it out, just give him the gospel, like really just give him my heart. And I eventually went, that weekend. I found a time and sat with him for a few hours and we were just talking. And it's like I had this intention, like, well, God was calling me to do that, so I must see some sort of revelation from him. And he did. He's like, sorry, I don't believe, man. Like, I just don't believe it. And I was like, all right. So we know I love you. And, we kept going, and we hung out a decent amount. And it's funny because that sort of thing had happened multiple times where I just went to him. I just pleaded, like, dude, I want you to see this. And I'll never forget this. I was at the studio, just working, and he texts me and he says, hey man, just want to let you know I recommitted my life to Christ. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah. He's like, I was just in my house and I've just been thinking about things, and I just really see all this evil around me and all this stuff. And he's like, God just kind of showed me all this evil and how much evil's in my life. And I'm just like, I've been sitting here for years, and it shows that point, yes, God can use us, and hopefully me being in his life helped that or plant the seed. But it's so true about how we don't do it. I mean, he was by himself in his house. So he's been going to church, he's been getting involved. I mean, it's cool to see, but it just shows you that.
Yeah, it's cool.
It's really not you.
I think it's good too. Oh, were you going to say something?
No.
I was just thinking too.
Yes, I was, but I'd rather hear from you.
Chris and I have these conversations all the time because we're very opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to sharing Christ. He's very, and I always think of confrontational as being negative also, but he's very bold and very, he shares the gospel in just about every conversation that we're having about, something with that. So, like I said, I think it's good for us to remember not to compare ourselves to each other with it because, even myself, I'm like, oh, not sharing the gospel every time I talk to somebody. Yeah. And I'm not doing what Chris is doing. And then I get down on myself sometimes about it thinking, and then I'm like, but he's like, I can't do what you're doing. He's like, I'm not relational like you are. I mean, he's relational, but in different ways. So I think it's really important to remind ourselves of that.
Yeah. And we play such a comparison game in Christianity. I mean, somebody will share something and I go, well, I guess I got to go do that, or why didn't I do that? And it's something we have to fight all the time. We actually have to confess to the Lord how much we compare with each other. And that's part of why this was so freeing to me. And there's two concluding things. One, I want to remind you, you don't need to be reminded about it. This is the guts. The power's in the gospel. It's not you. It's not in your style. It's not in how you present it. It's not how good you do it. It's not how bad you do it. The power is in the gospel. I'm not sure I believe this, but one of my young life trainers said, the power is so much in the gospel that if you told somebody fish for sale, they could meet Jesus. It's kind of interesting, okay, but the point is the power is in the gospel. The second thing, and the reason I wanted to go through styles, this was tremendously freeing for me. I lived with a lot of, like you're saying, Lonnie, I lived with a lot of, I can't do that. And what happens is people feel that they can't be a certain style and they just quit. And most of the people that you're going to be dealing with, one, cannot share the gospel. I did this with my life group one time. I said, okay, and you were in the gospel's edge. So I went in, I said, okay, lead me to Christ. What do you think I got? Deafening silence. Okay, now some of us because they're in a group, but it's so they don't know how. But then secondly, they don't know that God isn't saying, Gary, you're relational. I really want to screw you up. I really want to mess you up. And I just want to make it so uncomfortable for you for the rest of your life. I don't think God does that. I don't. Now, will you be in a funny little situation and you say, okay, God, here we go. You're telling me, okay, here we go. Joyce, close for us, will you? Prayer.
God, I just thank you for this time that we've had here. I thank you for the words that have been shared. Really the freeing words, the words of encouragement, who you are, who you want us to be. And God, I just thank you that you love us beyond all else. And you just want us to lean into you and allow you to do the work. And it's not about us. It's about allowing you just to kind of embody us and allow you to work from there. God, I just thank you so much for this time, and I just pray that each one of us as we go out from here will be reminded of the one or two points that just